At the Valley of the End, Naruto stood across from Sasuke while the blonde used Kyuubi chakra to create a cloak around his body with one tail visible, and the Uchiha used his curse seal at level 2 to transform into a demonic-looking bird. Sasuke simply grinned, believing that this fight was his, and Naruto was furious at the moment the dead last of the academy would understand his role in remaining at such a low level. Sasuke formed a Chidori in his right hand and asked, "Are you ready, loser? Are you ready to die and help me achieve my ambition?" Naruto allowed the fox's demonic power to affect his voice as he said, "You fool, don't you know how many people back in the Leaf love you? They give you everything and yet you spit on them like they did the opposite." Sasuke angrily remarked, "Like I care about them, they're weak. I don't want their love, I want hate. I want to hate everything and everyone. The only way I can do that is to leave this miserable place we called a home," anticipating that Naruto would become agitated. Rather, Naruto simply laughed. Was the loser giggling? Laughing as if Sasuke had just told him a joke that made him laugh. Naruto bit his thumb and ran it over a hidden seal on his left hand, which glowed with the design of the hidden seal spreading all over his body beneath his orange jumpsuit. "I'm so glad you told me that, Teme. You have no idea how long I have waited for this day, the day that I stop holding back," he exclaimed. What's happening? Refusing? Not possible. Sasuke thought this as he witnessed Naruto's whole body being engulfed in light and the young Uzumaki exploding with power greater than his own. As the light faded from Naruto's form, he revealed a much taller, stronger, and more powerful version of himself than he should have been all along. Surprised? Let me tell you a little story, a story about a boy, his demon, and the lies fed to him all his life by one Sandaime Hokage, a man I made beg for forgiveness and had wrapped under my thumb since I was 7 years old, Naruto said. Rewind. 5 years ago, Naruto was sitting in the guest seat across from the elderly man in the Hokage office, staring down into the Leaf's head as he looked back at him with sorrow in his eyes. Why? Since Naruto had discovered the truth about everything Kyuubi, his parents, why he was abused and despised by his peers as a child. When Naruto and Kyuubi first met, Kyuubi used Kyuubi's words to say, "You have a lot to answer for, old man. I'm tired of these attacks. It was a whole bunch from the Uchiha clan this time, nearly killed me. Had Kyuubi not saved my ass, the boy had gone unconscious after being stabbed in the chest by the sword of the Uchiha leader." The Sandaime said, "Naruto, I'm sorry you've had to suffer for so long, but the village will get over." But the Hokage was further silenced by the killer intent that Naruto had learned to employ from Kyuubi and the fact that the fox added his own. As Kyuubi's voice began to mix with his own, Naruto exclaimed, "Get over it? Get over it? When? In a few weeks? Months? Years? They've had all this time to get over and yet they don't? Where is my godfather? My godmother? Where are the guardians I was supposed to have in my father's last student should those two not be available? Tell me, you lying sack of shit." He knew that Kyuubi's chakra was slowly eating away at his body. The Sandaime saw the boy's eyes turn red and his clawed hands crack the armrest of his chair. They want nothing to do you, Naruto. I have tried to convince them, but the grief they've suffered from losing those close to them had blinded their judgment, and their hearts on what is right. I'm sorry, the Sandaime said. Naruto said, "Well then, if they won't raise me, then you will," as he saw the momentary man staring back. The Sandaime said, "And Naruto, I can't possibly raise you. My time is needed being Hokage." But Naruto's appearance grew more feral and the boy's demonic cloak only seemed to get bigger. "I'm not giving you a choice. Either you help me get stronger or I free Kyuubi," Naruto said, observing the old man's face turn white. When the Sandaime saw Naruto's eyes narrow, he said, "You wouldn't? What about your parents? What they died for? You would betray their memory? Your promise to me in one day being Hokage?" Naruto saw the pain in the old man's eyes as he said, "They've already been betrayed by the likes of you and those they trusted. As for my promise, it was made under false pretenses by you, old man, and therefore is void." The Sandaime replied, "I see very well. I'll make time to you, Naruto, but no one can know what we do, and you will have to hide your abilities until the time is right to reveal them to everyone." After Naruto nodded his head. "Not a problem, just keep your eyes on the Uchiha. Kyuubi told me they're connected to him and they know it," Naruto said, observing the Sandaime nod in recognition of the fox's alleged connection. On that day, a new agreement was made, and the Uchiha clan's demise was officially inaugurated. Flashback end. This isn't achievable. I am the village's elite, me, the final Uchiha. Sasuke believed that Naruto's power greatly outweighed his own, and that this was causing the Uchiha great distress. Naruto revealed that he was wearing black pants, boots, and a white trench coat with 9 tails on the back, with a fox frozen in a roaring state while the demonic cloak was still covering his body. "Since then, I was trained by the Sandame in secret after I helped him use shadow clones to deal with paperwork. And I fooled everyone into thinking I was the weak one of our so-called genin team. Fooled you pretty good too, along with all the other bakas that couldn't see the truth, Naruto said. Sasuke said, "She? You mean," because he knew exactly to whom Naruto was referring, and the fact that someone else had witnessed what he had not infuriated him. "Yeah, we talked right before my fight with Neji was going to start. Within that hour of the Chunin exam finals, she confessed everything to me and I accepted her love, knowing it was pure unwavering love. We formed a special bond since then and we have been together in secret with no one knowing about our relationship," said Naruto with a grin on his face, girl flooding his mind. Sasuke grinned now and would have smiled more at Naruto's expression if it hadn't been one of intense anger that conveyed pain to all of his enemies. "Doesn't matter who or what you are after I kill you. I'll go to Orochimaru, get stronger, and then kill that bitch of a weakling after I have a little fun with her body," he said. Naruto declared, "Time to die," as he prepared the Rasengan in his hand and approached Sasuke with a look that conveyed his lack of tolerance for the Uchiha. Sasuke exclaimed, "You first," before the two jumped into the air and clashed their attacks. Naruto easily overpowered Sasuke's attack and made contact with the Uchiha's body, causing it to be consumed in raw energy. "Oh no, Sasuke. I insist you go first on this one. After all, only a Uchiha elite like yourself deserves the honor of dying first and meeting oblivion," Naruto said. "This cannot be it. No." Sasuke thought this as he let out a loud cry of agony, dying unlike any other Uchiha before him, and feeling Naruto's attack's powerful energy obliterate his body. At the same time, Naruto felt as though those energies were drawing him into a dimensional void, and all he could see was hope for the future. To be honest, the blonde didn't care that Naruto didn't know if this was his last moment. He had had enough of the leaf and hoped that the one special woman in his life would be waiting for him. "Hinata-chan, wherever I am, I'll get back to you, I swear." Naruto closed his eyes and let the dimensional light carry him wherever it had opened up, thinking, "Wait for me, please." Before he passed out, all he could feel was the force of his body hitting the floor and the quiet footsteps of an old man with a staff tapping the ground every few seconds. The older voice said, "Well, aren't you a strange one, child?" before he picked up the boy as best he could and carried him into the tower behind him. "How about the Tower of Isengard?" As he struggled to sit up from the ground, Naruto woke up from his unconscious state feeling different. He discovered that he was in a room that seemed to be pulsing with power and that his body was on a simple single bed. When Naruto noticed that his hands were clawed, as they were when using Kyuubi's chakra, and that his teeth were noticeably sharper than usual, he paused while sitting up straight and placed a clawed hand to his head. When he looked around, he saw that the room was actually dark, but his vision was so improved that he could see everything as if it were daytime and hear the heartbeat of someone else approaching him. Naruto now wished for a mirror to examine his face after realizing that he had fox ears on the back of his head. But when the door to his room opened, an old man with mostly white hair and a white beard wearing all white, holding a staff that pulsed with power like the building they were in, put an end to that line of thought. Naruto was observing the elderly man warily, aware that he was an unexpected visitor and would be treated with some deference until his host's hostile expressions emerged. "You're awake. I see. I must say your transformation surprised me after I brought you in," the elderly man said, examining Naruto with the same caution that Naruto was examining him. Naruto got out of bed and expressed gratitude that he was still completely clothed. "I have a high recovery rate in terms of healing and I'm no stranger when it comes to pain being inflicted upon my body. Thank you for taking me in when you could have left me to die," he said. The old man commented, "You're welcome, young one. I must admit, your appearance surprises me, and I sense you are not human given the energy that radiates from your body." After witnessing the boy change into the hybrid animal-like state he was after, Naruto stood up and cracked his back, saying, "You could say that despite the debt I owe for this, I don't really feel comfortable sharing such secrets about my past." The old man who saw Naruto exclaimed, "Fair enough, we all have our secrets, though I don't suppose you would explain to me where it is you've come from, since your clothing tells me you are not from this realm of Middle-earth," laughing. "You could say that I'm from another realm where we have different territories called the elemental countries, with each one named after a different element like fire country, wind country, water country, and any other element you can think of. Even the names of different kinds of animals, foods, and the seasons themselves were used to help name countries where I'm from," said Naruto as he observed the elderly man's eyebrows, intrigued by this knowledge. When the old man saw Naruto narrow his eyes at him, he said, "Really? How interesting. I took the liberty of inspecting your weapons I saw were in your possession, which I will return, of course." He also noted that the weapons were the type of weapons one finds on an assassin. Naruto saw the man nod in agreement, and the Namikaze suspected that there were assassins in this world as well. "Where I'm from, we are called shinobi," And yes, we are assassins. In most cases we do many kind of missions paid for by the clients assigned to our village. We protect, guard, assassinate, and steal when it is required of us without being seen, Naruto said. Or something like that. So you are a mercenary of sorts from a strange land, one that works in the shadows, the elderly man remarked after observing Naruto nod. He knew that the boy was secretly anxious because there was still the unresolved problem of what would happen next. The old man grinned slightly at Naruto's directness, as if it were refreshing. Yeah, look, I'm trying to be respectful, but if you could tell me your name, and what you do, it would make things a lot more easier, Naruto said. When Saruman saw Naruto staring at him doubtfully, he said, "My name is Saruman. I am a white wizard that rules these lands in this fortress called Isengard. What is your name?" It was evident that his line of work was not highly respected in the boy's dimension. "My name is Naruto, which translates to Maelstrom. When you say you're a wizard, does that mean you specialize in magic? Real magic, not the kind of stuff that kids like to play with, like smoke and mirrors?" asked Naruto as he noticed Saruman frowning at him. Saruman said, "Do not think me so lowly as those fools, who would taint the mystic arts I have lived for countless centuries mastering." Boy, after glancing at the boy. "All right, what comes next?" As the white wizard turned away, Naruto remarked, reflecting on the strange circumstance in front of them. Saruman saw Naruto nod, but it was obvious the boy was dubious of this kind offer and was not accustomed to people giving him things out of pure kindness. "I sense no ill will aimed at my person from you, Naruto, so for a time, I will accept you as my guest here at Isengard, and help adjust to your new surroundings in Middle-earth," Saruman said. "I am grateful to Lord Saruman." Naruto bowed slightly and accompanied the taller elderly man out of the room to get a better look at the new world in front of him. "I will do everything in my power to repay you for this act of kindness you have shown me," Naruto said. In addition to the fact that he was in a tall tower of a fortress with a view as far as the eye could reach, Saruman had produced a recent map of Middle-earth and allowed the boy to examine it before explaining the various regions of the realm and its history, including the different races that lived in different parts of the lands, from elves to dwarves, and men to hobbits, as well as how each race behaved and how to speak to them in a way that they would listen. Saruman even showed Naruto the Palantir, one of the seeing stones made ages ago and one of the few that were still in use. Naruto informed Saruman that each of the cages of the shinobi villages had orbs similar to these, but that they were difficult to use and had a limited range of seeing anything inside the village. To put it mildly, Naruto absorbed Saruman's words like a sponge and, in return, told the white wizard about his abilities, known as chakra, to use jutsus that commanded the elements by shinobi in his world, how they could manipulate the elements using chakra to destroy buildings, flood areas, and many other deadly things that impressed the white wizard. Naruto was, in fact, just as interesting as Saruman had hoped, and even more so when the boy demonstrated some of the attacks he had learned during his early years. The Namikaze also explained the use of sealing, as it would have the ability to bind, weaken, enhance, and even store things for later use. Saruman was greatly impressed by the untapped abilities that Naruto was giving him at the moment, and over the course of the following few months, they learned a great deal from each other. Saruman taught Naruto about Middle-earth, and Naruto agreed to help Saruman with anything that he might need in the near future regarding Middle-earth. The Namikaze knew that something was coming, but the white wizard kept it a secret from him for his own reasons, possibly because it was a significant issue that he did not understand, and he respected Saruman's decision to keep up with his own arts. But eventually, Naruto could learn nothing more from Saruman, and it was time for the boy to go out and find his own way in this world. Naruto's plan, as he told Saruman, was to travel and make a name for himself after receiving some money from the elderly man that was hidden away in the Tower of Isengard. Since the white wizard had determined that Naruto was a mercenary, the boy was going to pursue this career path here on Earth to see if he could manage it. Saruman remarked, "Take care of yourself, young Master Naruto," having been impressed by Naruto's capacity for learning and the fact that those shadow clones further aided the boy's instruction in Middle-earth customs. "Lord Saruman, I will, since this would be a means of repaying the white wizard," Naruto declared. "If there is ever a time that you need my assistance, I will come to assist and aid in your mission." "Master Naruto, you have gained a lot of knowledge from our time together," Saruman observed. Naruto chuckle at the notion and wave it away, saying, "It's a shame you can't learn the arts of magic, as you would have made a great apprentice and a white wizard yourself one day." "Unfortunately, I don't have to follow that route." Naruto grinned at the old man and set out to explore Middle-earth. "If you hear about a demonic mercenary running around Middle-earth, you'll know who it is, and can find me easier," he said. The White Council had charged Saruman with studying the impending storm, and he said, "There goes a boy, who has the power to cut through the fates like a blade, and I can only pity the unfortunate souls brave enough to make him their enemy, before entering his tower to continue his work." Before Lake Town years later, Esgaroth, also called Lake Town, was a wonderful town full of trade, happiness, and joy for all the people who lived there. At the moment, one figure was sitting at the local pub, sitting inside by the window, wearing a combination of ranger and elf clothing that he had collected from his travels. It was crimson red with brown, black, and a hint of orange, though the last color came from the cloth that was wrapped around the lower part of his face to conceal his facial appearance. He was wearing a well-rounded straw hat with a few bells hanging from it, just like the Akatsuki wore when he first met them when Jiraiya was pursuing Tsunade. Namikaze Naruto was the figure's name. Naruto was currently smoking some pipe weed in peace. He was lounging here, having replenished all the supplies he had used on the previous assignment, and was prepared to embark on the next mission when it presented itself. His previous assignment had gone well, and he had earned the money from killing that band of bandits for that little kingdom to the east. It would, too. According to the Middle-earth calendar, Naruto had gained a lot of notoriety over the last 4 years and was known as the Demon Fox Mercenary throughout the lands. He was referred to as a fox because the former Leaf Shinobi had outsmarted his prey and yet acted like a demon. Naruto could only grin when he realized what he had become shortly after he literally crashed into this world and transformed into the actual Kyuubi in human form. The amount of Kyuubi's chakra he used after unsealing his body before crushing Sasuke at the Valley of the End kicked off a process that accelerated when he entered Middle-earth through the dimensional rift last year. The process was finished, and Namikaze Naruto turned into a full-fledged demon, with a blue sky and clouds to watch when he was bored. "Are you a mercenary demon fox?" A figure in black robes, with the hood concealing his face, spoke. The robes covered the entire hunched figure. "It depends. Do you want to kill me or hire me?" Naruto said this because he had made a lot of enemies and some of them had hired people to take him out of this world. The figure, "My master wishes to hire you," said. "What is the name of your master?" Knowing that being employed by a client's third party may result in payment issues, Naruto said. "Saruman," the figure said, causing Naruto to pause and turn to face him. "I understand. When will he need me to complete his task?" If the voice was any indication, Naruto shifted in surprise upon seeing the male's figure and realized he wasn't expecting to be hired right away. "You're not interested in negotiating the cost of your service?" the figure said, obviously perplexed by this. "I owe a lot to the White Wizard. All I'm doing is paying back my debt. When should I leave for Isengard now?" Naruto calmly uttered those words before puffing on more marijuana. "In 7 days, the figure said, prudently letting the issue rest and letting the White Wizard figure it out. "I'll be present. Return to your master." Naruto saw the figure nod slightly and walk out the door after saying, "Tell him I'll pay back the debt I owe with this hiring." An additional customer for the notorious Fox Mercenary. The waitress here, whom many called Missy, said. "Yes. But this time, I'm the one paying," Naruto said, smiling politely behind the cloth at the woman who had been courteous to him despite knowing who he was based on his attire. Before returning to reading the book in his free hand, Naruto paid for the pint of the brew the establishment had made and discreetly drank its contents since he could easily reach Isengard in 4 or 5 days. Naruto had every right to take a short break before venturing into the hell that awaited him in the event that Saruman needed his services. 4 days later, Isengard. "My lord, are you certain he will arrive? I had my doubts about this mercenary and the White Wizard's belief in this alleged demon," Grima Wormtongue said. "He'll be there. I have no doubts about that," Saruman declared with assurance. "How do you know, my lord, though? What kind of power do you have to control a demon?" Grima questioned how the elderly man could have such confidence. "Because he will come here to pay me back in full for the huge debt he owes me, Master Naruto, isn't that correct?" Saruman said this as he turned to his right and Grima jumped in fear when he saw Naruto emerge from the room's shadows. "Lord Saruman said it well. What are you trying to accomplish with me?" Seeing Grima retreat from him, Naruto remarked, ignoring the smaller, cowering man in favor of Saruman. "Naruto, I need you to find me someone who has information that needs to be retrieved, and time is of the essence," Saruman said, observing Naruto nod in agreement because there have been clients in the past who wanted things finished as soon as possible. "Who is the target, and where should I search in general?" Naruto remarked as he watched Saruman approach the Palantir, a dark orb, and conjured up a picture of a gaunt, pale creature dressed only in loincloths. Gollum is his name. Although he hasn't been there in a while, he usually resides in the Misty Mountains and has information about a valuable item that belongs to someone of great importance. Saruman saw the young man who had been a boy a few years prior nod in comprehension. "Once you have captured this creature, I want you to bring him Mordor and the fortress of Barad-dûr where the information shall be extracted," Saruman said. The someone of great importance is aware that I am taking this creature to his fortress, right? Is his army aware that I'll be stopping by? As the Namikaze understood, Mordor wasn't a pleasant place to go, and Naruto didn't want to start a fight unless absolutely required, he said. Taking into account its past, Saruman saw Naruto nod and glance at Gollum once more before retreating into the room's shadows. Once they have discovered what the creature knows, come back here and give me the same information, and more work will be available, Saruman said. This mercenary moves through the darkness as if he were a part of it. Grima was shocked to see it for himself and remarked, I did not think such a being existed. Even more justification to hire him. Grima, our adversaries trying to enlist our new ally, is the last thing I want, Saruman said. Now go to Rohan and gradually take control of King to copyright Odin to become my puppet in order to slow his kingdom down to a crawl. The dark-haired man nodded and left to complete his task. Barad-dûr's Mordor fortress. When Naruto first entered Mordor past the Black Gate, it appeared as though he had entered one of the 9 circles of hell, and the great red eye reminded him almost of Kyuubi's 2 crimson orbs that used to stare at him behind the cage. Naruto was relieved that the cloth that was wrapped around his lower face had special seals on it that were of his own design to keep out the poisonous fumes out of places like the one he was at now. It had been easy to capture Gollum, and it had been even easier to get him to Mordor because the foul-smelling creature was captured less than a day later. Naruto still misses the furball and their amazing training conversations from long ago. How long is this going to take? Naruto addressed the orc who was torturing Gollum in order to obtain information about the Dark Lord Soren's Ring of Power. Mercenary, it will be finished when it is finished. Watch what you say, the orc said, drawing the creature agonizingly to his limits with the device Gollum was on. Naruto heard Gollum yelling and pleading for help, which was painful for the man's delicate ears. He thought, this better be worth it. I'm surprised this thing had the Ring of Power for so long before losing it. After what felt like hours or even days of this, Gollum finally had enough and spoke in words that anyone who would listen could hear. Higher. Pax. Gollum's shout caused Naruto's eyes to enlarge, and he promptly left to inform Saruman of his discoveries. Shortly after Naruto departed Mordor for Isengard, 9 black-clad riders emerged from Minas Morgul's gates, rode in the direction of the Shire, and pursued anyone they saw bearing the name Baggins. The search had begun for the Ring of Power. 2 days later, Isengard. Saruman saw Naruto standing there and recounted what Gollum had screamed. So the creature Gollum spoke of someone named Baggins and that they were living in the Shire, Saruman said. Yes, with a hand smoothing out his beard, Saruman nodded, and Naruto remarked, but I'm surprised it would be in the Shire since only hobbits live there. My longtime friend Gandalf the Grey, a fellow wizard, frequently comes to visit and uses his magic to amuse them. Saruman questioned whether Gandalf now understood what he had done regarding the Ring of Power's presence in Shire. A total waste of his time, and it seems his love for the halflings has obviously dulled his mind, Saruman said. Even for Gandalf, the signs of Soren's return were too obvious to ignore. How likely is it that Gandalf will come here to seek your advice if he finds out about the Ring of Power? Naruto remarked after observing Saruman pause and then smiled back at the mercenary. It's actually pretty good. Every indication of Soren's comeback is evident. Gandalf the Grey rides here to Isengard to consult me. Orcs are congregating in Mordor, and smoke rises from Mount Doom because that's why you're here, my old friend, Saruman said as he descended Isengard's steps to greet the Grey Wizard getting off his horse. Gandalf bowed and said, Saruman, before informing the White Wizard of what the man already knew. Thus, the Ring of Power has always been in the Shire. Saruman walked with Gandalf at his side and felt Naruto observing them from one of the balconies above. Your love for the halflings has indeed dulled your mind, he said. We might have time to act if we move fast. It will be time to counter Sauron, Gandalf said, hoping the stronger wizard would concur. Is it time? Counter? Ha, Saruman said, realizing that the Grey Wizard wasn't anticipating that reaction as he noticed Gandalf staring at him in shock. Saruman sat down in the chair in his study next to the desk full of parchments, scrolls, and other bits of information before discussing Soren's return, how the Great Eye of the Dark Lord could see everything, and how Sauron was in the final stages of planning an all-out assault on Middle-earth. Naruto continued to watch from the sidelines in the shadows, silently gauging the Grey Wizard with calculating eyes. Eventually, the two entered the Tower of Isengard to discuss some sort of strategy. Are you aware of this? Gandalf exclaimed, surprised by Saruman's depth of knowledge. Saruman said, I have seen it, rising from his seat to show Gandalf the Palantir. However, not all of them have been found. Some are still missing stones as Gandalf attempted to conceal the orb. He noticed a flash of the Dark Lord's fire-like eye. "We don't know who else may be watching," he said. Saruman said, "The hour is later than you realize, my old friend," before describing how 9 black-clad riders would track down the Ring of Power Carrier and murder him. Frodo. After saying this, Gandalf hurried to a door that closed, then another, and still another, with it obvious who was closing them. "You don't think a hobbit could challenge Sauron's authority and will, did you?" "No one can," Saruman said. "We must join him." Gandalf, realizing that the Grey Wizard was too arrogant to accompany him after observing Gandalf's disillusioned expression as he looked at his old friend. "Tell me, friend, how long ago did Saruman the White abandon his justification for insanity?" Gandalf remarked as he watched Saruman swiftly use his staff and its magic to attack him. After Saruman was flung through one of the closed doors, Naruto acted, throwing a dagger at Gandalf, which struck the Grey Wizard with the weapon's butt end, causing the startled man to drop his staff onto the ground and giving Saruman time to use his power to take it. Before Gandalf could do anything, the White Wizard had him slowly spinning around on the floor with an angry expression on his face. Gandalf immediately returned the blow with his own, which soon had the two wizards engaged in a vicious battle of magic. "I offered you the opportunity to voluntarily assist me, but you chose to put up with pain instead." Gandalf was thrown high into the air toward the tower's ceiling, where darkness seized him, Saruman said, wielding both staffs. With Naruto at his side, the now fully recovered White Wizard Saruman returned to the main area of the tower to plan the next phase of his attack against Middle-earth. After Gandalf was sent to the only place he couldn't escape with his wizard staff taken from him, the mercenary was studying a map of realms, examining the locations of the Shire and the numerous places Gandalf could have sent the Hobbit with the Ring of Power. Naruto saw Saruman nod in agreement with the young mercenary, and he said, "There are many areas to hide, but few Gandalf would let the halfling go where he could not be discovered so easily, and it is those places where we need look to find him." Gandalf would have wanted this Frodo to travel east to Rivendell, the home of the elves. If he had sent this hobbit away from the Shire until a strategy can be developed to deal with it, he will want them to keep the hobbit safe from anyone vying for the One Ring's power. As Naruto arched an eyebrow at him, Saruman remarked, "The hobbit will travel through the areas leading to Rivendell, and that's where you need to go to retrieve the hobbit with the One Ring." "You want me to get the One Ring and the hobbit back? Why not simply kill the halfling and get it back?" Naruto said, observing Saruman's ruthless grin. Saruman noticed Naruto nod and walk away through the shadows surrounding them. "Because there is something about this hobbit that intrigues me, and I wish to have my curiosity satisfied in knowing how he got the Ring of Power in the first place," Saruman said. "Behind the cloth," Naruto thought, "and I can find a way to make my own Ring of Power with my own qualities add to it," before pursuing his target with a smile. Saruman approached the Palantir as he was doing this and made use of its power to speak with Sauron again. Saruman said, "Lord Sauron, Dark Lord of Middle-earth, you have the power of Isengard to command. Saruman is currently awaiting the Dark Lord's order. Construct an army for me that is worthy of Mordor." Sauron's ominous, ruthless voice reverberated throughout the space, seemingly rattling the massive stronghold to its core. "What commands did Mordor, my lord, give? What is the command of the Great Eye?" one of the two orcs said as he entered the room and saw Saruman's folded arms in deep concentration. "We need to get to work. Knowing what army needed to be assembled that was deserving of the Dark Lord's favor," Saruman said. Bree. A few days after arriving just outside the town, Naruto noticed that the entrance had been kicked down and that the presence of horse hoofs was a clear sign that the ring wraiths had been there. He leapt over the wall and onto the roofs of the buildings, moving silently as he followed the hoofprints, which were still deep in the mud on the ground even though they were only 2 days old, and discovered that they led to the prancing pony. The demon fox mercenary followed the tracks until they left the town on the opposite end and entered the forest area, heading towards Rivendell. Soon after, the ring wraith's horse tracks began to diverge in different directions, with the majority of them following a single path that led to the Weathertop, which was once the great fortress Aemon Sul and once had an all-seeing stone like Saruman currently possesses. The ring wraith's horse tracks stopped at the base of the massive hill and then eventually moved away from it, with his nose picking up the scent of smoke from a fire halfway to the top, indicating that the hobbit had indeed been here before the ring wraiths found out about the halfling's presence. Naruto's investigation at the top of the crumbling-looking fortress revealed that a struggle had occurred here, as a sword was found on the ground, and a faint smell of burned flesh hit his senses. With his right hand on the ground, he released red chakra from his palm and started using it in conjunction with his now red eyes to see what had happened. Since everyone produced energy from their bodies, some more than others, Naruto could manipulate his chakra to tap into the excess energies of others that were left behind and see events long after they happened if enough of an imprint was left behind. This was just one of the many abilities he learned that he could use when a client in a town controlled by Gondor asked for his assistance in figuring out who killed his wife. In this instance, there was more than enough fighting up here on Weathertop, and it was evident what happened with Frodo and the three hobbits with the One Ring. Their unity for their fellow halfling made Naruto smile, and he envied that hobbit for having such loyal friends, but the smile vanished when he saw Strider, a ranger whom even Naruto had heard of and knew not to underestimate in combat. This is what the Ring Wraiths did when Strider saved Frodo and assisted the fallen hobbit in escaping with the others so they could hurry to Rivendell. Seeing enough, Naruto assembled a small army of shadow clones and told them to scout around while he jumped off the hill to the ground, landing with a loud crashing sound, and ran at unbelievable speed toward Rivendell, knowing that he was close to his prey but that his prey was even closer to them. Naruto didn't want to fight the elves because doing so would require him to remove one of his more deadly weapons from his arsenal. Ironically, a special hybrid design of their Ona and face hunted down by the immortal creatures for using it. Even though the number of elves was gradually but distinctly declining over the years, they still had more than enough to cause trouble and could still aid in opposing Sauron should they decide to ally with men again. Naruto didn't want that to happen, at least not yet, and only if it was inevitable. Soon after, Naruto noticed 9 black-clad riders riding equally black horses with blood-red eyes and blood streaming down their bodies, pursuing a person on a white horse who appeared to be a sick child, but based on what Naruto knew about what had happened on Weathertop, the sick child was actually the hobbit he was looking for, holding the Ring of Power. Naruto had no idea where Strider or the other 3 hobbits were at the time, but if he had to guess, it would be that they had left for Rivendell, while this rider was traveling more quickly and directly to the elves' home. The Ring Wraiths were at a river on one side when Naruto caught up to them, and the rider, who now realized it was a she-elf, was pursuing them on the other side with her sword drawn. "Give us the she-elf halfling," the Ring Wraith, who appeared to be the Nine's leader, said. "Come and take him if you want him." As she watched them brandish swords and slowly order their horses to cross the shallow river, the elf uttered those words. She has an ace up her sleeve, Naruto thought, looking down at the group from his perch above them on one of the trees. Something is off here. She can't fight all 9 by herself and protect the hobbit in his condition. Naruto jumped higher from his perch on the tree to avoid the water and the shaking the tree he was on had created, and then he looked down to see the she-elf holding the hobbit in her arms. The she-elf did indeed have an ace up her sleeve, as she started chanting in her native tongue, and soon the river's water level increased just as the Ring Wraiths were halfway across before they were devoured by the raging water heading towards them. It was time to attack to finish his mission. Naruto leapt from his position, drew a pair of daggers, crossed the river, and planned to kill the woman quickly. The she-elf looked at him fearfully, knowing that she would not be able to protect Frodo after exerting a lot of strength to call forth the water to drive the Ring Wraiths away from their pursuit. "Remain away." The she-elf, who was defending her child like a protective mother, said this as she pulled out her sword once more. "I won't murder you," Naruto said, "not if you give me the hobbit and one ring," since he didn't intend to kill the woman and wouldn't even if she did. The she-elf said, "Agent of Sauron," with hatred. "No, but sufficiently close if you keep fighting and struggling with the idea of being noble. I will kill you for the hobbit, even though I don't want to." "What is the halfling's problem?" Naruto remarked as he turned to face Frodo and noticed how pale the hobbit appeared. "Why are you concerned?" Seeing Naruto shift his gaze from Frodo to her, the she-elf said. "No, I don't. I simply want to know what would trigger such a response. Without a doubt, it is not the Ring of Power," Naruto remarked. He's hardly been exposed to it, as he noticed the woman giving him a wary look and debating whether or not to tell him. At last, she made the decision to tell him. "One of the Ring Wraiths stabbed him with a mortal blade. He will join them and become a slave to Soren's will if I don't bring him to my father." The she-elf, now taken aback by the man's sorrowful expression, said, "Not that you would care since you are one of his servants too. You are sufficiently close. As I mentioned, I am not so callous as to allow a spirit like his to be enslaved to the shadows, and I serve the Dark Lord through another." In regard to young Frodo, here place his daggers in their holsters and walked away, leaving the she-elf gaping at him. "Take him to your father, but know that the next time my path crosses with Master Baggins here, I will not be so merciful and I will complete my task assigned to me," Naruto said. "What's your name?" Knowing that it might be helpful to know in the future, the she-elf said. "The Demon Fox Mercenary is who I am." "Naruto is my name. It's a maelstrom." "What's yours, she-elf?" Naruto asked, turning to face her through his straw hat. After observing Naruto nod, Arwen said, My name is Arwen, daughter of Elrond the Lord of Rivendell, and proceeded to leave. Naruto disappeared into the forest's shadows and proceeded to inform Saruman of his failure. Do not fear me, Arwen, daughter of Elrond the Lord of Rivendell, as this will probably be the only meeting we will ever have, and I do not wish it to end with bloodshed, he said. Several days later, Isengard, although it was not his place to question the man, and the White Wizard currently in charge of the project was obviously not happy about the failure to capture the Hobbit holding the One Ring. Naruto didn't like the way things turned out when he returned to the tower because he liked the trees that used to cover the large area outside and around the ring. Now, it was a wasteland, smelling of steel, fire, and the new life of dark things being born in the ground beneath the tower. Even more so after Gandalf had escaped Saruman with the aid of the more intelligent animals who had sided with the Grey Wizard. Naruto could see the pain in the White Wizard's eyes before it quickly left, and he knew that Saruman wanted Gandalf by his side rather than against it because they were close. So the halfling is with Elrond now, Saruman said, aware that although this was alarming news, it was actually only a small setback that could be overcome quickly. One of the ring wraiths successfully stabbed him with a mortal blade, resulting in a wound that is currently being treated. Are the elves still large enough to fight you and Sauron? Naruto remarked, observing Saruman's mind, figuring out the odds. No, they are not as numerous as they were in the past, Saruman remarked. The elves' greatness has long since diminished considerably since the time they allied with men to fight the Dark Lord long ago, before turning to face the mud where nasty creatures were slowly emerging. Is Gandalf aware of what you're creating? Naruto remarked after observing Saruman slowly nod. My old friend is more interesting than I initially thought. Saruman, who knew the Grey Wizard better than anyone and had mostly taken advantage of him, said, he will eventually tell the Elf Lord about my creations before leaving Rivendell. Elrond is not a moron, he is aware of our actions against Sauron. Naruto saw Saruman nod, but he could see that the One Ring and the brief window of opportunity to seize Frodo Baggins were too small to take advantage of. The Ring of Power will not stay Rivendell for long, Naruto said. By then, the One Ring would have left the safety of Rivendell and would be out in the open to hunt again with less restraint. Though Naruto suspected the halfling holding the One Ring would not be alone, whatever Saruman was brewing down here in terms of an army was nowhere near ready and wouldn't be until much later. Once the halfling departs from the protection the elves will provide, you will have to track his trail when the time is appropriate. Strike? Saruman remarked after observing Naruto nod. What about that creature from Gollum? Naruto said inquisitively. He was released. I think we could benefit from his insane quest for the One Ring, Saruman said plainly. And I'm allowed to kill Gollum and bring the Ring of Power here if he gets his hands on the object we're after, Naruto said, observing Saruman's malevolent grin. Obviously by then, such a creature will have served its purpose, Saruman remarked, observing the slowly increasing number of the creatures he had created as the orcs labored to make armor, shields, spears, crossbows, and swords in this war machine the White Wizard had constructed. I'll remember that I owe a few favors to some of my contacts who hear things. After observing what Saruman was examining, Naruto remarked, one in particular might help me, before leaving to see how some of his contacts were doing. My lord, is it prudent to put your trust in that mercenary? After observing Naruto depart, one of the orcs who was approaching the White Wizard uttered those words. Saruman saw the orc nod and said, he may be a mercenary, but I can trust him much more than you with the tasks I need done, and they require the utmost discretion. Minas Tirith Gondor. A few days later, as he moved through the less than honorable areas of the city, which only opened late at night, Naruto silently navigated the shadows of the White City, the capital of Gondor, his thoughts racing in 100 different directions. Naruto was aware of a merchant in this area who sold exotic goods that many would consider to be dark in nature, something that the Namikaze was in fact interested in. The mercenary knocked on the door in a certain pattern and waited for the hardly perceptible click. The sound of the door unlocking was heard, and the man opened it to be met by his supplier of dubious goods, Marcus Honeydew, who, like Naruto, didn't care about the world as long as they could survive and make a little profit along the way. Marcus was a man who kept his ears to the ground but kept his mouth shut unless money was offered, at which point he would do the exact opposite. Normally, people with that kind of habit didn't live long, but Naruto was his only client, and the slightly portly balding man had already been threatened with a tortoise death if he told anyone about the mercenary. Naruto, you arrived just in time, Marcus remarked. You seem to be doing that a lot. He was baffled by how the mercenary knew when to arrive when the time was just right and not a day later. That's what good instincts do. You know things that I need to know, Naruto said, noticing a small grin on Marcus's face. Marcus remarked, You came to the right place for the right price of course. After witnessing Naruto return the smirk in spite of the demon fox's clothed face and the money sack being tossed onto the table. That should cover it, Naruto said, aware that Marcus was a little pricey when it came to purchasing information, but that the man was much more accurate and that it was the best kind to have when interacting with someone of his caliber. Not too long ago, I received a message from a friend of mine who has a sister who works as a maid for Boromir, the steward of Gondor's eldest son. I learned that he left right away after receiving a special summons to a confidential meeting from the elf Lord Elrond of Rivendell. My friend's sister told me that she had been informed by Boromir that other people from all over Middle-earth were being called to Rivendell for this meeting. Marcus saw Naruto nod in agreement and knew the mercenary might join the impending action. I'm talking about all the high-ranking elves, dwarves, and several other lords from different kingdoms are heading there, Marcus said. Before turning his attention to the next stage of his own scheme and tossing another bag of cash onto the table, Naruto pondered. So Elrond is gathering allies from all over Middle-earth to oppose Sauron. But will he tell them about the Ring of Power, and if so will they submit to temptation to use it for themselves? For what purpose is this? Marcus remarked, observing that the wealth being bestowed had now doubled. Get moving. Marcus, you are someone I know. Rare items are never too far behind when you have good information for me, and I haven't heard that you have nothing to sell, Naruto said, watching Marcus laugh at him because he knew he had the man completely correct. You're correct in actuality, I do possess something, Marcus said, I'm not sure what, but knowing your tastes, and may be of interest, before returning to his storage area and presenting Naruto with a circular object wrapped in a plain cloth. Naruto placed it on the table and opened it to reveal that it was a palantir, identical to the one Saruman had in Isengard. The mercenary turned to face Marcus in astonishment. Where did this come from? Said Naruto, demonstrating his obvious interest in this specific item. At a unique fishing location where his grandfather used to go. A fisherman discovered it far below the surface of the ocean and offered it to me at the time. I had no idea what it was, Marcus remarked. Hell, I still don't know what it is, but I know this thing is mystical, and I know how you get about rare mystical items. He heard the mercenary laughing at Naruto's good fortune and saw him smiling behind the cloth. Naruto remarked, she always did say I had the devil's luck, briefly recalling Tsunade. What? Marcus said, I don't understand what you just said. Nothing. Joke inside to seal the deal. Naruto shook Marcus's hand and wrapped it in the cloth once more before saying, I'll take it. It's a pleasure working with you, Naruto. When Marcus noticed the demon fox mercenary grinning, he said, come by anytime. Naruto said, you keep selling me things I'm interested in and I'll keep buying, before heading out of his contact's workplace to inform Saruman of his discoveries. Despite his status as a mercenary, Naruto harbored a secret ambition that was slowly rising to the surface of his consciousness. This ambition was second only to returning to Hinata. Naruto detested dreams for a long time because they only served to remind him of the abuse and suffering he had endured as a child. They persisted even after the abuse ceased following the Uchiha clan massacre, which many initially believed to be Itachi retaliating for their wrongdoings and made them fearful of attempting his murder before it was discovered that Itachi was the one responsible. Many initially held him responsible for Itachi's outburst, claiming that the Kyuubi had offered the prodigy some kind of power to murder the entire clan in the name of the demon and that he had been turned down when the event was over. Thankfully, as he grew older, the nightmares became more tolerable, and Kyuubi wasn't scared to assist in warding off the majority of them. His life became less stressful after speaking with Hinata, and the nightmares quickly turned into pleasant dreams. The Hyuga girl had secretly grown stronger and more self-assured every day. And she was obviously happier with him than she had ever been with her clan, so they must have been for her as well. Naruto was currently having another of his happier dreams, which had always reassured him and kept his mind in check over the years since he had left the Middle-earth realm. In this dream, he was a nine-tailed fox, running through a grassy hill covered in flowers of all kinds. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and a sloth that resembled Nara Shikamaru was sleeping in a nearby tree, muttering, "Troublesome." Every few minutes a gorgeous lavender fox with 9 tails was on top of the hill, and Naruto saw it staring down at something before turning to face him. The female fox grinned when she saw Naruto. As Naruto approached the female fox he knew to be his mate, a powerful lavender scent filled his nostrils, causing him to sprint more quickly. The fox with the lavender hue was his Hinata-chan. Naruto whispered, "I've missed you, Hinata-chan, my sexy vixen," as he embraced her face and synchronized their tails. Hinata, whose voice is still the sweet, naive voice Naruto remembers, said, "Naruto-kun. Don't say that you know what it does to me," causing him to purr into her neck. Naruto's words, "I know, and what you do drives me wild in the process," caused the lavender fox to blush and giggle, but her expression quickly turned dejected. As Hinata started to fade, she said, "I've missed you so much." Naruto-kun Konoha is a shadow of its true self. The Hyuga clan elders seek to put the cage bird seal on me so they can control my sister when she becomes clan head. Come back soon. Naruto became furious at these remarks and immediately changed into a huge fox that destroyed everything in his path. By this time, Naruto had awoken from his dream and surveyed his surroundings before heaving a weary sigh. Usually, when he slept, his dreams didn't go like that. But they weren't always just dreams, because Naruto thought Hinata was actually with him and that their bond made it possible for them to do so. Naruto initially told her where he was, how he was attempting to return, and that he would rip through the space-time continuum itself to be with her once more. She had now informed him of this. His demonic chakra spiked dangerously at the thought of his lavender vixen wearing that cage bird seal, and he vowed to make the village pay for their conceit. Yes, nothing in the world of Middle-earth, including their dark lords, white wizards, gray wizards, elves, dwarves, and men, would prevent him from seeing his partner again. Hinata-chan, soon, all those who have wronged us will perish soon, and I will have the means to be with you once more, Naruto thought. His eyes glowed red, and his enraged growl filled the air before the Namikaze roared bloodthirstily, frightening the nearby animals in the forest. And was given attention by the recently established fellowship. Aragorn asked, "Did you hear that?" After noticing Gandalf's thoughtful expression in response to the roar, which conveyed a great deal of rage and even more hunger. Gandalf smoked his pipe and said, "Yes, I did, and I fear we may need to move sooner than expected if we are to make our way to Mordor." He then turned to Gimli, the group's lone dwarf, and proposed that they explore the mines of Moria, which belonged to his beloved cousin Balin. Legolas, the only elf in the fellowship, exclaimed, "There is something approaching from the south." Gimli responded that it was just a collection of clouds, but Boromir disagreed, claiming that whatever was approaching them was traveling against the wind. It turned out to be Saruman's winged spies. As a result, the fellowship faced a significant obstacle in their journey. Gandalf attempted to lead them over the snowy mountain, but Saruman was one step ahead of them and was using his abilities to block their way. Aragorn said it brought them too close to Isengard, and Gimli reiterated that they should pass through the mines of Moria. Boromir then proposed that they head for the Gap of Rohan. Silently, Gandalf feared going into the mines of Moria for good reason, which only Saruman himself really understood, because he had knowledge of what Gandalf feared and the events that transpired in Moria. The Grey Wizard was even more terrified to make such a choice because the White Wizard was still mockingly speaking into Gandalf's head. Moria down there, the dwarves dug too greedily. They woke up deep in the mountain. You know, a creature of flame and shadow. Gandalf said, "Let the ring-bearer decide," glancing at Frodo to decide. Frodo saw Gandalf nod his head and said, "We shall go through the mines," as the fellowship descended the mountain. Until they arrived at the foot of the mountain and began speaking with Saruman via his palantir, the fellowship had no idea that Naruto was keeping an eye on them. It was brief, though, as the Demon Fox mercenary informed the White Wizard of the group descending the mountain and was waiting for more instructions. Saruman was taken aback when Naruto discovered one of the lost seeing stones. Saruman spoke to Naruto through the palantir, saying, "Keep following them, Naruto. Just keep an eye on the group and let the dark creatures in the mountain do their job before obtaining the One Ring." Given that it was getting late in the day and would soon be nightfall, Naruto remarked, "Understood, Lord Saruman." When nightfall finally arrived, the fellowship had arrived at the entrance to Moria. With a little magic prodding, Gandalf was able to uncover the elves' hidden doorway and attempted to open it. The important point is that he tried, but the secret door would not open, and he had left the Grey Wizard perplexed as to what the password was. As he watched from above them, using chakra to adhere to the mountain wall and remain hidden in the shadows even though the moon was shining down from the sky above, Naruto found the scene amusing. Naruto witnessed a huge creature slowly waking up inside the small body of water near the entrance as two of the hobbits were hurling stones into it. The fellowship entered through the moonlit door after Frodo said, "Speak, friend, and enter." It's a riddle. Gandalf, what's the elvish word for friend? As the group entered, Naruto thought, wise for a hobbit, and he moved slowly from his position to the entrance to see if he could enter covertly. Only to halt upon hearing Boromir's voice following their viewing of Moria's condition. Before the group started to withdraw with their weapons drawn, Boromir exclaimed, "This is no mine, it's a tomb." After he saw the dead dwarves' bodies, and Legolas said it was the goblins' doing. Naruto saw the water-based creature's tentacles rise up and snatch Frodo's leg, thinking, "That's the least of your worries." When the group was abruptly distracted by the monster, Naruto crept into Moria, Knowing that the Fellowship would be unable to escape in any other way because their weapons were insufficient to defeat it, the monster destroyed the doorway and buried itself in the debris as they withdrew back into the mine after Frodo was released from its hold. Gandalf led the group through the dark, war-ravaged mines of Moria, where he saw more dead dwarves from the past. He did this by using his magic to create a light inside a crystal on his staff to make things worse for the Fellowship. They took a number of different routes that led in different directions as they ascended to the complex center, and the Grey Wizard had no idea where they were. To put it briefly, they were lost. Boromir said, "This place smells of death no matter where you are. How can you stand it?" As he saw Aragorn shake his head and smile slightly. Legolas was unusually focused on the walls surrounding him when Aragorn said, "There are worse places than this that smell worse than this, I'm afraid." "Someone is here," Legolas declared, drawing his bow and arrow and concentrating on where the unwanted visitor might be. Naruto decided to make his presence known by advancing closer into the light that Gandalf's staff was producing. He then shifted his head slightly to avoid the arrow that Legolas aimed at his skull. "Very perceptive of you, Master Elf. You are indeed a credit to your race," Naruto said. Legolas remarked, "Make one more move and your life is forfeit," witnessing Naruto lift a big rock and appear to be about to drop it. "Please do shoot me, I dare you. The simple fact is once I drop this, it will make a lot of noise. And we all know that the army of goblins in these mines will not pass up the opportunity to spill more blood," Naruto said, observing Legolas pause briefly before drawing another arrow. Aragorn said, "You, Arwen told me of her encounter with the Demon Fox mercenary," as everyone pulled out their weapons and got ready to fight Naruto. Naruto said, "Then you also know I showed her and the ring-bearer mercy when I could have easily done the opposite," looking at the mercenary for a moment as Legolas was about to fire again when Aragorn paused his hand. "Why are you here?" Aragorn asked, aware that the man in front of them had the opportunity to attack sooner but chose to hold back. As he watched the three hobbits once again erect a sort of defensive wall around Frodo, Naruto remarked, "Aside from the obvious in retrieving the one ring from the halfling not 3 feet from you, I'm here right now simply to watch you and observe, nothing more," which only made the Namikaze smile. Seeing Naruto laugh, Gandalf remarked, "You are a spy for Saruman. I saw you at Isengard where you stopped me from fighting him within the tower walls." "Spy? Please. My talents go far beyond that, being a mere spy. As for my interference in your fight, I merely removed your weapon of choice from your hand, Grey Wizard, and sped up the inevitable end to the battle when I could have easily killed you. Besides, we both know Saruman would have taken your staff from you had I not interfered, and the results would have been the same." Naruto laughed as he pulled out his pipe and starting to inhale marijuana inside of it. Knowing how people like Naruto were about money and could turn a blind eye if the price was high enough, Gimli asked, "Since you are a mercenary, then perhaps you'd be willing to side with us for the right price, and not inform Saruman of where we are." As the group was taken aback by the news, Naruto remarked, "Believe me, Master Dwarf, when I say I'm not getting paid for this. If anything, I am paying back a debt I owe to the White Wizard, and I always pay back the debts I owe people if they are owed." Seeing Naruto shake his head no, Aragorn asked, "So nothing we have on hand could interest you in terms of buying your cooperation, if just for a time?" Naruto saw Aragorn's eyes widen and grabbed the amulet around his neck out of instinct. "You have nothing I want, not even that amulet around your neck glowing with elvish light from Lazy Arwen interests me," Naruto said. He knows it's from her, but how? As he watched Naruto, Aragorn thought. Gandalf remarked, "But you do desire something, it's in your eyes," realizing that the mercenary did have a cost, but they were unable to pay it since they were unaware of it. As perceptive as ever, Gandalf the Grey, Naruto said, "I do want something. Unfortunately, none of you have the means to grant it, which is a shame in itself, for if you did have the power to grant my desire, I would side with your fellowship without question, and personally carve a direct path to Mordor myself." Naruto then turned to face Aragorn, briefly focused on the man's scent, and laughed. Gimli, who is currently having trouble understanding the Demon Fox mercenary, asked, "May we ask what's so funny at the moment?" The ranger's eyes widened in shock as Naruto said, "Nothing. Well, it's just that I never thought I'd be in the presence of Gondor royalty," concentrating all of his attention on Aragorn. "There is no one here like that," Gandalf remarked, aware that Sauron was unable to learn about Aragorn or the true identity of the man. From his seated position on the rocks above the group, Naruto said, "Don't lie, Grey Wizard. You just aren't good at it. I know the man beside you is indeed Gondor royalty because I can smell it in his blood. There is a reason people call me the Demon Fox mercenary after all," to their mild astonishment. Boromir said, "So the rumors are true, you really are a demon fox," as he watched Naruto nod his head and allow his laugh to get a little louder. Naruto said, "Yes, though that was not always the case," as his eyes briefly darkened and he resumed smoking his pipe. When Frodo saw Naruto shake his head, he asked, "What do you mean?" Naruto pointed to the pathway to his right, directly beneath his position on the rocky wall. "That's a story for another time. If you truly want to get out of this place, I suggest this path since the air smells less foul, and clearly doesn't have so many dead dwarves like the others do," he said. Boromir remarked, "And why should we trust someone like yourself when you clearly work for Saruman?" As he watched Naruto smile even more and briefly believed he saw fangs behind the orange cloth. Naruto casually threw the rock at Aragorn, who caught it easily, and watched the potential future king of Gondor consider his options. "I don't want you dead, not yet, not in this depressing place. Besides, if I really wanted to kill you, I'd have dropped this rock, and let the noise it makes from bouncing around alert every goblin in Moria of your presence," Naruto said. Frodo remarked, "He has a point," as he saw Naruto staring at him with those blue eyes that would sometimes turn red before returning to their original shade. Gimli remarked, "Perhaps, but I'd still feel better if he wasn't the one to suggest the path, and have him go first," as she watched Naruto shift his head slightly to the right, seemingly thoughtfully, and then replace it. "I would. But there is a chance your elvish friend would shoot me in the back the moment you're free, and I'd rather have your friend be blamed for upsetting me. You see, despite my service to the White Wizard Saruman, as well as the Dark Lord Sauron to an extent, my powers are far beyond either of them, and I'm holding a great deal of that power back right now," said Naruto as he watched Gandalf's face remarks. Gandalf remarked, "So what I sensed is true," after observing the others gaze at him for a while. "That's right, my power is a force of nature unlike anything you've ever seen before. I don't like to use it because of the damage it would cause, not to mention make me your worst enemy should Sauron be defeated, and I'd rather not be hunted like some rabid animal," said Naruto as he watched Gandalf grinned. Aragorn said, "We have little choice in taking your advice, I take it?" as Naruto gave him a quick glance and a small smile. Aragorn continued to look at him suspiciously as Naruto said, "If you are worried that I might lead you into a trap, then I shall make a promise with you, and uphold my end of the deal if you do yours." Boromir was more dubious of Naruto than Aragorn. "And how do we know you will honor whatever promise you make?" he asked. "I always honor my promises, kind of a family thing. On my mother's side I inherited whenever her side of the family made a promise they did everything in their power to keep it." "What about you, Aragorn? Will you honor your end of a promise in the name of the royal bloodline of Gondor?" said Naruto as he looked at Aragorn. Gimli inquired about the specifics of the promise, asking, "What is the promise exactly?" Naruto saw Aragorn glance at the others and then back at the mercenary as he considered whether or not to make such a promise. "Very well, I promise not to fight anyone here in this fellowship while within the mines of Moria, nor will I try to take the Ring of Power from the Ring-bearer, and I will allow your group a one-day head start before we become enemies again. In return, you must promise not to try any attempt to kill me, and also honor the one-day head start after we get out of here. Promise?" Naruto said. At last he made up his mind as Legolas kept his weapon aimed directly at the mercenary's head. "Aragorn, son of Arathorn," said, "Very well, I, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, promise on royal bloodline of Gondor that I along with the rest of the fellowship will not make any attempt to kill you, and grant a one-day head start once we leave the mines of Moria." Aragorn saw Naruto smile before jumping off his position on the rock wall in front of the heir to the Gondor throne. Naruto walked toward the path he had previously indicated and said, "We have an accord, then follow me," noticing that they were still reluctant to listen. Gimli, who was the first to follow Naruto, said, "It's either follow him or stay here with this deathly smell. Might as well die where the air is cleaner." The others followed suit. Gandalf said, "There are times when it's best to follow your nose," and then followed suit. Naruto guided the group along the path, but the Demon Fox mercenary stopped in front of a section that led to a tomb that contained dwarf skeletons. Ignoring the others' cries to stop, Gimli hurried in upon seeing the tomb and collapsed on his family's tomb as he sobbed over the Lord of Moria's passing. When Legolas saw Naruto shake his head, he asked, "Did you bring us here so we could see you make him suffer at the loss this place has brought to his eyes?" Silently, Naruto said, "No, that was not my intention," as he watched Gandalf take a big buka which turned out to be a journal and read aloud what was written in it. Gandalf read the page with the final words written on it, which had bloodstains on it. "We cannot get out, we cannot get out. They have taken the western hall and we have barricaded the eastern passageway, but it will not hold. Drums in the deep pounding in the darkness. We cannot get out, we cannot get out. They're coming," he said. Behind them, a loud noise indicated that one of the hobbits, Peregrine, Pippin, Took, had unintentionally knocked over a dwarf skeleton while he was carrying a bucket down a well. The noises reverberated throughout the mines naturally. The first action had terrified everyone nearly to their core, and the hobbit's guilty expression didn't help Gandalf's already irate state. Before putting the book away, Gandalf uttered the words, "Fool of a Took. Throw yourself down the well next time to relieve us of your stupidity." It took some effort not to laugh when Naruto said, "If he doesn't do it, I will," which caused Frodo to smirk for a moment. After the sound of drums reverberated through the deep parts of the mines and the sound of numerous scurrying feet moving toward them like a swarm, any humor that might have been present did not materialize. Boromir glanced out the doorway, but he quickly pulled his head back to shield his face from an arrow, and with Aragorn's assistance, he closed the door. Boromir said, "They have a cave troll," his face grimacing in tandem with his voice. They stopped to see what weapon the mercenary appeared to treasure. "That explains the drums. I didn't want to use this under these circumstances, but well, I did make a promise, and I can't keep it if you are all dead," Naruto said, pulling out a weapons scroll and his preferred weapon. It was a golden bow staff engraved with rune patterns and a crimson seal. It was truly a sight to behold. With ball spikes the size of his fist on either side of the staff, it was unexpected that the bow staff's seals and runes glowed crimson when Naruto touched specific areas of it, and then it started to transform into an elvish glaive. With his bow and arrow already pointed at the door that the wave of goblins on the other side was slowly destroying, Legolas asked, "How did you get that?" "I had it made by some elves I helped out a few years ago. Custom made just for me and of my own design," baffled its smith at the forge in terms of the runes and then the seals I placed on it to make it change from one weapon into another. "I don't like using this unless I absolutely have to, and to be honest, it's one of the reasons I got the name, Demon, in my title, Demon Fox Mercenary, from the way I wield this," Naruto said with a slight chuckle and joined the rest of the participants in the fight. Fortunately, the doors had been ruined, and the goblins had rushed in with their cave troll, ready to smash everything they could find. Gandalf and the four Fellowship hobbits were pursued by those who moved around the goblins, who first engaged Aragorn, Boromir, Naruto, and Legolas. As Naruto claimed, he was fighting like a demon with his special hybrid glaive, swinging it viciously down on the seemingly endless stream of goblins that came his way at one point. He even saved Aragorn twice from being stabbed by one of the enemy's blades. The cave troll, however, was a different matter. Cave trolls were difficult to defeat. They were walking powerhouses with thick skins, and any weapon they wielded was more lethal in their hands than it would be in the hands of most other races with a spear in its hand. The cave troll in front of the Fellowship and one demon mercenary were ready to spill the blood of anything that came into its line of sight. Its current goal was to defeat Naruto. Naruto had to dive beneath the cave troll to avoid the beast's enormous fist, which he swiftly slashed deep into its back while dodging right to avoid the spear. Now, furious that its target was injuring its body, the cave troll let out a howl of pain and persisted in attempting to murder Naruto. As the goblins it was accompanied by pursued the Fellowship, the mercenary was too swift and lethal with the glaive to attempt to smash Naruto. After severing the legs, tendons and chopping off an arm, he leapt onto the cave troll's back and stabbed the glaive in the neck, piercing its spine. Just as the last of the goblins with it perished at the hands of the Fellowship, after providing them with a brief respite, the cave troll moaned a little and fell to the ground, its blood smearing the surroundings. Everyone exhaled in relief that they were all still alive and unharmed, even though the goblins' blood was visible on their clothing. As he watched Naruto transform it into a bow staff and then reseal it in that scroll, Gimli remarked, "They were right to give you the title of demon with the way you fight with that weapon, young mercenary," wondering how the man could do that with such an object. Then Naruto picked up his fallen straw hat, dusted it off, and placed it on his head. "You fight pretty good yourself with that axe of yours, Master Dwarf," he said. With Aragorn nodding, Legolas stated, "So the rumors about him being part fox are true," pointing to Naruto's crimson and blonde hair as well as the fox ears on the mercenary's head. In a low voice, Aragorn said, "Be careful. Just because he keeps his word doesn't mean the trickster in him won't try to make things easy for us." Naruto turned to face the two and looked a little embarrassed when he said, "If you saw the fox ears, then you know my hearing is just as keen in picking up your conversation and hearing your words of caution." With the help of his staff, which makes it easy for them to see him, Gandalf led the group and declared, "We cannot dawdle here to the bridge of Khazad-dûm." They were soon being pursued by an army of goblins. Soon, goblins were all around them, ready to kill them with ease because of their sheer numbers and the bloodlust in their eyes. At this point, Naruto was thinking about utilizing some of his more subdued abilities, but as he did, a loud roar reverberated throughout Moria, frightening away the enormous goblin army that had completely surrounded the Fellowship. Naruto remarked, "For once that was not me," sensing that something hostile was approaching them. Boromir asked Gandalf in his ear, "What is this new devilry?" Naruto could see that the Grey Wizard was worried about what would happen to the Fellowship. Holding his staff for support, Gandalf exclaimed, "A Balrog, a demon of the ancient world. unable to contain the fear this creature was inciting in him. Legolas looked at Naruto and asked, "A friend of yours?" Naruto saw Gandalf nod before leading them where they needed to go and outrunning this new enemy in slow pursuit. "No, I had no idea such creatures still even existed. It's powerful in its own right, I'll give it that much, and I have a feeling that discretion is the better part of valor right about now," Naruto said. As they continued to run deeper into the mountains, they descended the lengthy set of stone steps, only occasionally turning to look behind them to see the Balrog was closing in. The group reached a gap in the long stone staircase's steps, where goblins were waiting high above, ready to pick people off from their vantage point before the stairs started to tremble violently from the impact the Balrog was making behind them. Boromir and Gandalf leapt across the gap, followed by Legolas, who returned fire and killed several goblins. Aragorn then assisted in throwing 3 of the halflings. Despite the dwarfs' protests about being picked up in this way, Naruto chose to expedite the process by creating a shadow clone, picking up Frodo and Gimli, and then leaping across with them before the shadow clone dispersed a few seconds later. The group proceeded to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, which, upon observing that it was a narrow path, was undoubtedly intended primarily for strategic military purposes in preventing large enemy forces from crossing. Naruto then grabbed Aragorn, and they leapt across next. By now, the Balrog was almost upon them, and the only thing between them was this slender bridge path that appeared to be barely strong enough to hold a cave troll. Its path was also blocked by that, and Gandalf, Naruto and the other members of the Fellowship observed as the Grey Wizard fought the creature of fire and forced it to retreat from the bridge by weakening the bridge with his power. Gandalf caused the path to the Fellowship to collapse when the Balrog attempted to advance, sending the great demon of the First Age plummeting into the abyss below. To put it mildly, Naruto was impressed because he was certain that this creature would require a lot of effort on his part and that, based on appearances, it had temporarily depleted Gandalf's strength, but the Fellowship's reprieve was short-lived because, in a defiant move, the Balrog used its fire whip to wrap it around Gandalf's ankle and drag him to the edge of the broken bridge, where he was barely hanging on. For no apparent reason, Naruto hurried forward and seized Gandalf, yanking him from the precipice. The mercenary felt the Grey Wizard was restraining him despite his efforts, and it didn't make sense until he looked into the old man's eyes. Gandalf exclaimed, "Fly, you fools," before dropping Naruto and plummeting into the abyss. Frodo cried out, "No," as he was dragged back, and the group was soon forced to depart when the goblins began shooting arrows at them. Now that the group was facing away, Naruto created a shadow clone and had it accompany them as he dove into the abyss himself. Aware of the Grey Wizard's expression, Naruto was not going to miss this duel between the two, which might ultimately be advantageous for his future plans when he returns to the elemental countries. With the Fellowship, the shadow clone of Naruto observed the group exhausted, depressed, and on the verge of collapsing in despair. "Well, that was fun," he said. Aragorn ordered them to gather the hobbits among themselves. "Legolas, Boromir, Gimli, get them up, we need to go," he said. Boromir said, "Give them a moment for pity's sake," since they needed to rest, and this was as good a time as any. Knowing that Saruman and Sauron's forces would be encircling this area in an hour, Aragorn exclaimed, "By nightfall, this area will be swarming with orcs. We need to reach the Lady of the Wood where we can be protected from harm. Hurry." "What about him?" Pippin asked, gesturing to Naruto. "Don't worry about me. If anything, I have to tell Saruman that you visited the Lady of the Woods, but I was unable to enter because I knew how well guarded it was. Enjoy your respite while you were protected by the Elf Queen, because I have a feeling that your problems will soon resume after you leave her realm. We appreciate your assistance in guiding us through Moria, young mercenary. Despite your career choice, you are a person of honor," Aragorn remarked, observing Naruto nod his head slightly and smile at him. "The future heir to the Gondor throne is welcome despite the fact that we are on opposing sides of this conflict. I wish you luck. In case you don't remember, my name is Naruto." "It means maelstrom," Naruto said, giving them a tip of the hat before leaving. Before he went poof, when he was no longer visible. Isengard. The Great Eye sent agents to Isengard to confirm that the White Wizard was indeed building an army for the Dark Lord and using it to destroy the world of men. Saruman scowled as he sensed something moving silently within the shadows, trying his best not to be seen, or sensed at all by anyone. The White Wizard allowed his senses to expand to their fullest, but found nothing of what he had sensed earlier, and played it off as a spy for Sauron, keeping tabs on him. As Saruman made his way down to the breeding chambers to observe the dark results of his labor, he thought, "Sauron will see the army I have created, and once they have crushed Rohan, I will move them to take out the Dark Lord once I have the Ring of Power." As this was going on, Naruto emerged from the shadows, wiped his forehead, and silently cursed himself for being so irresponsible. Of course, this Naruto was not the real one. but rather one of the numerous shadow clones the Namikaze created before departing the tower to continue preparing and researching various topics under the White Wizard's nose. As he made precise copies of what he saw, returned the originals, and carried the copies to a place where the real Naruto could retrieve them later, he thought, now where was I? Oh yes, the making of these creatures Sauron wants the White Wizard to make, and how they are made. He was making good progress on his master plan. The Woodland Realm. I understand the Grey Wizard gave his life in spite of the Demon Fox mercenaries' attempt to prevent Gandalf from slipping into the shadows. How strange this demon is, and how he keeps his word speaking to Legolas alone, Galadriel said. I find that hard to believe when it comes to a mercenary. She also saw her fellow elf, who informed her of all the events that took place in Moria. I did the same, but he kept them anyway, and I also know that Naruto is working for the White Wizard to pay off some debt. Can you guess what it might be? Seeing the Elf Queen wondering what sort of debt the Demon Fox mercenary was repaying, Legolas remarked. No, I don't. He moves through the shadows, remaining concealed there and only striking when his adversaries are not looking. Galadriel once used her abilities to sense Naruto after learning of a demonic creature roaming the land, fighting for whichever side paid mercenaries the most. She felt the power of the Namikaze the moment she locked onto his distinctive signature. At the same time, I can sense his power, and the depths of it all is truly astounding, Galadriel said. The Elf Queen had wanted to speak with Gandalf about him, but the Grey Wizard was gone, and the Fellowship was in danger of being destroyed. She was aware of how much the man was suppressing his demonic power, and his description of himself as a force of nature when fully unleashed seemed to be an accurate statement to that effect. I witnessed him fighting. He truly lives up to his moniker. When Legolas saw the Lady of the Woodland Realm nod her head thoughtfully, he pondered. The weapon he chose to fight the goblins was a glaive that could change into a staff of some sort when he wished, with strange runes, enzils as he called them, to make it transform. I'll discuss this with Elrond later. Send Frodo to me and return to the others, Galadriel said. I would like to talk to him, as Legolas bowed his head before departing to complete his task. After 2 weeks, Isengard. Hello, my friend, welcome back. Did you succeed? Saruman remarked after observing Naruto shake his no. After leaving Moria, they hurried to the Lady of the Woods domain. The dying part was a lie because Naruto's healing factor made it nearly impossible for him to be killed, but he still said, I can't risk entering that place and risk getting captured or killed. Given how close they are to her domain, it was probably best that you didn't complete your mission of striking when they least expected it. Aside from providing the ring bearer with temporary shelter, her involvement now will make things more difficult for us, and we cannot have that. But why you didn't tell me this using the Palantir intrigues me, Saruman remarked as he noticed Naruto staring down at the mud mass and the movement inside. I wanted Sauron to be unaware of your plot to acquire the One Ring for yourself. When Naruto saw what emerged from the mud being inspected by the orcs below, he declared, if he finds out about your secret plan, he will find a way to replace you and take over the operations here. Yes, it's absolutely true. Sauron is always observing what I do, Saruman said, gesturing to one of the orcs to show him one of his most recent creations. Naruto remarked, they look dangerous, after spotting one of the creatures now, mud-stained, clad only in a loincloth, and ravenous. Indeed, do you know how the orcs came to be? They were originally elves who were captured by the Dark Lord, tortured, and changed into a perfected form of life. My fighting Uruk-hai, whom do you serve? The White Wizard asked, a few inches from the creature's face. Saruman! Exclaimed the Uruk-hai, his eyes full of bloodlust and his voice full of hunger. When Naruto saw these creatures in front of him, he thought, perfected indeed, and realized that this was what he would eventually need for his own army. Yes, exactly. Even though Naruto was aware that they were only a single component of his master plan, he still dreamed of having an army that was devoted to him and would serve him exclusively. Naruto nodded his head, but Saruman kept in mind that the pledge to not kill any Fellowship members was now null and void. I wish to test my new army out by sending a small detachment to hunt down the ring-bearer. Go with them to find the halfling with the Ring of Power, Saruman said. It was unfortunate because they were decent people, but unfortunately, professionalism took precedence over sentimentality and was unable to defend his debt to the White Wizard. Naruto said, get them ready and I'll lead them. As he turned to leave the White Wizard, he knew the old man was counting on him to successfully finish the One Ring quest. Saruman gave his Uruk-hai a motivational speech before directing the group to leave, with Naruto walking at a leisurely pace. Naturally, Naruto was aware that this group was only a prototype for the actual army Saruman was building and that any flaws in this group would be fixed in the others. Within a few days of the Fellowship, now Frodo was afraid. The Elf Queen knew that Boromir would attempt to take the Ring of Power away from him for his own self-serving motivations, which the One Ring had sparked. Frodo had just escaped Boromir with the One Ring before he saw the Great Eye of Sauron. And now Aragorn was searching for the young halfling. Frodo stepped back from the man when Aragorn came up to him and asked the heir to the line of kings if he would accept the Ring of Power, holding it in his hand so the man could see it. Closing Frodo's One Ring wielding hand, Aragorn whispered, "I would have followed you to the end into the very fires of Mordor," and remained on one knee in front of the gradually soothing hobbit. When Frodo saw Aragorn nod in understanding that the Fellowship would not be able to make the trip to Mordor, he said, "I know, look after Sam, he'll be sad about me leaving." "The ring-bearer himself had to do it alone," Aragorn exclaimed. Frodo, as he noticed the blue glow of the sword sting by Frodo's side. Frodo yelled, "Orcs!" as he attempted to flee, but when he turned around, he saw Aragorn urging him to hurry before they reached him. Aragorn exclaimed, "Run!" as he saw the young hobbit dash out of view before turning to confront the massive Uruk-hai force in front of him, Naruto in the lead. "We meet again so soon," Naruto said, raising his hand in a silent command to stop the force he was carrying from charging at Aragorn. "You are here for Frodo, you won't get to him," Aragorn declared, raising his sword in preparation for battle. Naruto snapped his fingers and the small army he was leading charged the potential future king of Gondor. Naruto then walked around them to find Frodo. "We'll see about now, won't we?" "Kill him," Naruto said. The others soon caught up to the rest of the Fellowship, with Legolas helping Aragorn kill them with deadly accuracy with his arrows while Gimli approached much closer with his axe, taking advantage of his small size to avoid their sight until it was too late. Soon after, the Horn of Gondor roared loudly enough for everyone to hear, luring the Uruk-hai forces away from the three Fellowship members and toward the Horn of Gondor's user. Boromir, the steward of Gondor's eldest son. The Uruk-hai flocked to Boromir like moths to flame in an attempt to murder him and perhaps steal the Ring of Power from its bearer in an attempt to restore his lost honor for almost giving in to the evil will of the Ring of Power and his own frailty of failing to recognize the truth until it was too late. The man was currently attempting to shield two of the four hobbits in the Fellowship. Unfortunately, an arrow piercing his chest in the heart prevented him from using his sword skills to slay the monstrous enemies surrounding him. Boromir struggled to stand and fought off the Uruk-hai, but was briefly stopped by another arrow from the archer approaching him. The man then continued again, but a third arrow completely stopped his body when Boromir saw his executioner pointing an arrow directly at his head and Naruto standing next to the archer with a dejected expression on his masked face. He collapsed to his knees. While the others took Pippin and Merry to Saruman, Naruto said, "Farewell Boromir, may you find peace in the afterlife," and then he gestured for the Uruk-hai to shoot the arrow at Boromir's skull. They would have to comply and placate the White Wizard for the time being, even though neither was Frodo Baggins. The entire Naruto body went poof when he heard a yell from his right, revealing himself as one of his shadow clones. Naruto turned to see the Aragorn sword in mid-strike sever his head, although the Namikaze was hunting down Frodo himself. The real Naruto, who was not that far away, inwardly cursed at the timing of the man and chose to let the Uruk-hai fight Aragorn alone. It was getting out of hand. Naruto saw the boat the elves gave them was already far downstream. When he followed Frodo's footprints to the river, he soon felt the others hurrying to his current location to prevent Frodo from departing. The demon fox mercenary jumped into the trees and saw Legolas, Gimli, and an unexpectedly living Aragorn, who appeared somewhat battered after what he had done. Gimli said, "The Fellowship has ended, it is over," with a voice full of defeat. Gimli roared, "Yes," before the three of them set out to rescue their kidnapped friends. "Not while we still have heart and are true to ourselves. We can at least give Frodo a fighting chance by drawing the Great Eye away from him. We'll travel light. Now let's hunt some orc," Aragorn said. With a strong center, the Fellowship could still survive despite its damage. Naruto leaned back against the tree he was standing on after the group had left and used the Palantir to speak with Saruman. The White Wizard showed up in front of him as anticipated, and he noticed that the elderly seemed content. After noticing Naruto's cloth-covered face and checking to make sure he wasn't being overheard, Saruman said, "Ah, my young friend, how goes the search for halfling with the Ring of Power?" before speaking into the orb. "The only good news I can deliver is that the eldest son of the Steward of Gondor is dead and the two other hobbits of the Fellowship were captured by our forces. The rest of the Fellowship is trying to catch up with them while leaving the Ring-bearer to travel on his own," Naruto said, observing the White Wizard frown after learning that Gandalf's small Fellowship had been severely crippled without the Grey Wizard leading them. "I almost had them, but Frodo got away with another of the halflings down the river, and are now making their way to another area to disembark before continuing their quest to Mordor," Naruto said. "It isn't possible right now. If we try to take the Ring of Power for ourselves, Sauron will become suspicious of us. Let the Hobbit continue his journey to Mordor, as it will keep Sauron busy, and then proceed to Rohan. I need your deadly skills with King de Copyright Odin's only son Theodred before he returns to Adoras in a few days. If he does, I will lose control over Rohan, and Grima will be closely observed by those close to Theodred, such as his cousins who are already there. Saruman knew that Theodred and the younger members of the Rohan royal family were not very trusting of Grima, so he kept him at a distance. Naruto saw the white wizard grinning malevolently at him and asked, "As you wish, Lord Saruman. How goes the army you plan to send to sweep through the people of Rohan like a plague?" "Very well, actually I will soon have an army that no force of men has ever faced in this age," Saruman remarked after Naruto nodded. Before leaving for the kingdom of Rohan, Naruto pocketed the orb and broke the mystical connection he had with Saruman's Palantir. "Understood, I'll contact you after I kill Theodred," he said. Before reaching a single, logical conclusion, Naruto started replaying everything that had happened recently and what he had witnessed using the various memories of his shadow clones in his mind. The situation continued to become more intriguing, really fascinating. Since he allowed the halfling of a ring bearer to elude him and the Uruk-hai army sent to capture the Hobbit, Naruto has not been feeling like himself for the past few days. The sleepless nights weren't enjoyable at all because he could feel Hinata's anguish at knowing something unpleasant, but she refused to tell him and looked very depressed about it without informing the Namikaze. When Naruto woke up, his mate's suffering had made his blood boil, and he was desperate to vent his resentment on someone or something. When Hinata, in his dream state, told him what would happen in a few months, the emotion reached a boiling point and almost sent Naruto into a rage in their dream world. His beautiful Hinata-chan had been forced into a political marriage by the Hyuga elders with a man who was of high-standing influence in the Fire Daimyo's court and was almost old enough to be the girl's grandfather. The plan was to have a child with the elderly man in return for some powerful support that would improve their standing with the feudal lord of Fire Country. Furthermore, the Hyuga elders intended to use a very special cage bird seal that was made specifically for this kind of thing. They would then properly teach the elderly Mana, who was also a sexist Piga, how to activate it and force the Hyuga woman to submit if she ever became unwilling to comply with his wishes. It didn't help that, based on Hinata's view of the picture she was shown of the elderly man's appearance in his youth and his current appearance, Theodred, the son of the king of Rohan, was an exact replica of him when he was younger. Naruto had never witnessed his future mate so distraught, claiming to despise her father for allowing this to occur, the Hokage for lacking the courage to stop it because, in Tsunade's words, it was the way of politics that must be respected, and the fact that she was being denied the opportunity to be with the person she loved. With the possible exception of the Konohamaru Corps, who continued to revere Naruto in spite of everything that had transpired after learning of the death of the last Uchiha, and how the leaf had turned the Namikaze into a wanted man with a substantial bounty on his head for killing the last Uchiha, no one sympathized with Hinata's suffering. Naruto could only smirk at the anticipated news because he assumed Tsunade would approve of it. This was because she had not only inherited the council's bigotry, which had gradually eroded the authority of the Hokage title from the late Sandaime over the years, but she also lacked the courage to reclaim it and fight for what she believed in, as the perverted idiot continued to be perverted around women and use his title of Toad Sanin to occasionally get laid with some two-bit hooker. Jiraiya was no better than what Naruto had learned from Hinata. With the second group of Uruk-hai Saruman sent to help him, Naruto found Theodred and the escort of his Rohirrim taking the young prince back to Rohan's capital, shaking his thoughts of that and how much he would love to return to Konoha to make them regret their actions as well as save his mate from their schemes. When he saw the image of this man, who was so old that Hinata had foreseen her future, Naruto's eyes glowed blood red. Husband-to-be, as well as the teasing laughter he overheard in the voice in the picture. The voice was saying, "She's mine now, demon, your mate is mine. And there is nothing you can do to stop me from making her my pretty little pet to ravish every time I desire. She will sire me a child of my blood and will please my body during the pregnancy. You have lost everything," inside the Namikaze's head. The Uruk-hai nodded in comprehension, and Naruto knew they sensed his demonic energy briefly enveloping his body. "Kill the Rohirrim around the target, but know the prince is mine, and mine alone to destroy," Naruto exclaimed. One of the Uruk-hai exclaimed, "Charge, devour their flesh," as Saruman's army charged the riders of Rohan, and they complied by allowing the Prince of Rohan plenty of room. This surprised Theodred, who, while riding his powerful horse into battle, killed a few Uruk-hai who came close enough to swing a sword at him. However, he soon found himself fighting, knocked off his horse, and facing the demon fox mercenary, who was spinning daggers around his fingers. Even with his master-level skill, Theodred was unable to match Naruto's speed, strength, and agility, which allowed him to outmaneuver the Prince of Rohan. Naruto jumped over the startled man, who was not prepared for the move, and then brought his blade down vertically on the mercenary, enjoying the sound of his blades piercing Theodred's armor and flesh. "Young prince!" exclaimed Grimbold as he rode toward Theodred and watched Naruto leap away with the daggers in his blood-stained hands. "The bloodline of the Rohan king is now gone," Naruto said, wiping the blades of his daggers on a flag with the Rohan mark. "He's alive for now, but not for long, and will no doubt die without medical aid even though his injuries cannot be healed no matter what medicine you give him now." Naruto then gestured for the other Uruk-hai to retreat now that their mission was finished. Several days later, Isengard with an evil grin, Saruman observed that his army of Uruk-hai was expanding daily and that he would soon have enough to crush the Rohan before directing them to attack Gondor's flank while Mordor's forces attacked from the front. But his smile vanished when he looked into his most helpful ally Naruto's troubled, angry eyes and felt a twinge of sympathy for the young mercenary. Although the White Wizard knew it had nothing to do with the campaign to crush Rohan, he felt it would be best to find out why the young man had been getting more irate lately and refused to disclose what it was. Saruman remarked, "You are troubled, my friend," as he observed Naruto leaning against the wall and rubbing his eyes while attempting to hide his lack of sleep. Naruto asked, "Is it that obvious?" after observing Saruman nod. Saruman said, "You've denied yourself several days' worth of sleep," and Naruto laughed sourly. Naruto remarked, 2 days of sleep actually, as for the reason I don't feel like telling you," watching the White Wizard scowl a little. Saruman tested Naruto's loyalty by saying, "Surely, you are not having second thoughts about joining my side in this war, and the deeds done to get us this far? Does my disrespect to nature offend you in any way?" Naruto said, "No, of course not. My feelings have nothing to do with Middle-earth, this war, you, or even Sauron for that matter. This is a personal matter," although Saruman only gave him a somewhat sympathetic nod. Saruman sighed after observing Naruto's eyes briefly turn red. "I see, perhaps you would like to explain it to me so I can better understand and possibly help you," Saruman said. In light of this, Naruto made the decision to inform Saruman of all he had discovered regarding the situation in his village and the fate of his mate, how his blood was boiling with anger and how this news was causing him deep internal pain. Naruto failed to disclose to Saruman that the Namikaze had been secretly devoting a significant amount of his time to finding solutions to his dilemma of returning to the elemental countries. "Now do you understand?" Naruto asked, observing Saruman nod after giving him a thoughtful, appraising look. Saruman once again put Naruto to the test by saying, "Yes, that is indeed troubling. What do you intend to do?" "Isn't it obvious? I'm going to find a way to open the rift again and get back to my mate no matter what. I won't let Hinata suffer at the hands of that man old enough to be her grandfather, much less be her great-grandfather. If one pushed it in terms of age, I will do what I must," said Naruto as Saruman nodded slightly. Saruman remarked plainly, "I could help you find a way, Naruto. No, I will handle this problem on my own. Besides, you have an army to build and look over before sending them off to crush the world of men," replied Naruto without hesitation. Saruman remarked, "Maybe later, then, after Rohan is crushed beneath our feet," after observing Naruto nod his head. Naruto responded, "Yes, when will the army be ready?" after determining that the subject should be removed from his private life. Seeing some surprise on Naruto's face, Saruman said, "They will be ready in a few more days when the time comes to unleash them upon Middle-earth. I want you to lead them into battle and crush the people of Rohan for good." The Namikaze agreed, though, and started to leave, pausing to turn back to face the White Wizard. Naruto asked, "Do you mind if I borrow something from the tower? I'll bring it back," as Saruman arched an eyebrow in response. Knowing that there were some things that one could not just borrow from Isengard, Saruman asked, "That depends. What is it you wish to borrow from me?" Naruto remarked, "Just a chair, a simple chair," after observing the White Wizard's alarm. Saruman said, "A chair? That's it?" and was not at all convinced that the mercenary merely desired a chair. Naruto said, "That's it," after observing Saruman's lack of belief that he only wanted a chair. Saruman said, "Yes, I suppose," after observing the mercenary nod before heading off to retrieve his chair. But for what the White Wizard was unable to comprehend. 2 days later in Fangorn Forest, the final members of the Fellowship of the Ring made their way into the vast forest, which was full of untamed trees that were said to be able to talk and even move from their ground-based roots. They had entered to look for their 2 missing hobbit allies, who had been captured by the Demon Fox mercenary and a sizable Uruk-hai force that had attacked earlier. Since the eldest son of the Steward of Gondor lost the battle, they were still grieving the loss of Boromir, a good friend and ally. They had previously encountered the Rohirrim, who informed them of Saruman's use of his abilities to contaminate the Rohan king's mind and the killing of the Uruk-hai who were transporting 2 hobbits. The group initially believed that the halflings had been killed in the attack when they saw the heap of dead bodies, but Aragon's ranger tracking abilities helped him track down the two hobbits' trail all the way to Fangorn Forest. As the group approached a tree, the trees appeared to move a little, made noises, and the tension in the situation increased with each step. In a low voice, Aragon asked, "What do you sense?" Legolas said, "He's here, the White Wizard," which made the three of them anxious because they knew that if Saruman was present, Naruto might be as well and could attack from the shadows. As Aragon prepared his weapon, the other two followed suit, drawing from their own arsenals. "We must strike quickly or he will put a spell on us," he said. They attacked despite being blinded by the intense white light as they turned to face the enemy, knowing that any hesitancy would give Saruman the advantage after knocking away the throwing axe and the arrow. The White Wizard's figure used his power to superheat Aragon's sword, causing the ranger to drop it to the ground. The unidentified voice observed the trio attempting to protect their eyes from the glaring light and said, "You are following the trail of two young hobbits. They passed this way the day just before yesterday. They met someone they didn't expect to see. Does that comfort you?" "Who are you? Show yourself," exclaimed Aragon, aware that if this was Saruman, one of the man's spells would have either killed them or imprisoned them. They were shocked to see that the white-clad figure in front of them was not Saruman at all, but rather someone they had assumed would never be seen again. Gandalf was the one. Gandalf was back when the man appeared in front of them and Legolas bowed respectfully. Aragon exclaimed, "It cannot be. You fell." Gandalf stated, "Yes, I did, through fire and water," recalling his encounter with the Balrog and the creature's fall at his hands prior to darkness engulfing him. Rewind. Before lightning was called to the Grey Wizard's sword and thrust, the Balrog mercilessly tormented Gandalf with its dark fire on top of the icy mountainside. They had fought on. The blade pierced the creature's body all the way to its heart. In his narrow victory, Gandalf had time to catch his breath before the Balrog fell from the icy mountain to the hill beneath the summit of the massive mountain. The Grey Wizard was unaware that Naruto was below, examining the body of the fallen Balrog, since his former spirit as the Grey Wizard had abandoned him and started his transformation into a strong White Wizard. He knew this creature was a unique treasure that didn't deserve to be destroyed in this way, and he had been astounded by the battle he had just seen with his own eyes. However, Gwaihir the Winged Lord had already swooped down and picked up the fallen wizard before taking off for his destination before Naruto could do anything about his inspection of the now dead Balrog. Naruto watched the enormous bird fly away while creating a strong illusion to conceal his body from the enormous bird. He paused to ensure that evil had left before turning his attention back to the fallen demonic creature in front of him. Naruto, who has a ceiling tattoo that runs the length of his arm before covering it in demonic chakra, whispered, "You will do nicely, my new pet. Oh yes, you will be my ace in the hole for when I return home to Konoha, and we will give them a welcome that will shake them down to the very foundation of their souls," before slamming it into the fatal wound that Gandalf caused. Different streamlines of thick crimson chakra erupted from the wound and spread out over the monster's body as the demonic chakra revived the creature and restarted the Balrog's heart. Naturally, it struggled because it was now attempting to resist the power that had brought it back to life and what it perceived to be incarceration, but after attaching itself to the Balrog's limbs, the crimson chakra stopped it from moving and started entering its mind to establish a connection. The Balrog was quickly absorbed into Naruto's hand seals, and the seal designs retracted to form the creature's face on the upper portion of his right arm tattoo. Yes, they would recognize the face of a real demon, and Konoha would not know what had hit them. Flashback end, Gandalf remarked, "And I've been sent back until my task is done," as the group grinned at him in recognition of their increased chances. Gandalf, Aragon said, at a loss for words. Gandalf. "Yes, that's what they call me, Gandalf the Grey," Gandalf said, and Gimli repeated the name, too pleased to say it again. As Gandalf continued to smile at them, Aragon remarked, "It's good to see you again, my friend. I am Gandalf the White and I have come back to you now, at the turn of the tide," Gandalf declared, addressing them by his new Order of Wizards rank to ensure Saruman's forces didn't learn of this. He covered that aspect of his status with a cloak. In order to rescue the King of Rohan from the darkness that had now ensnared his mind and to assemble an opposing force before Saruman could finish his scheme to destroy the kingdom before it was too late, the group quickly mounted their esteemed horses and set out for Adora's. Aragon inquired about Naruto and whether the now White Wizard had any new information on how to handle the Demon Fox mercenary while they were riding. Unfortunately, Naruto's involvement in this war and the fact that he appeared to be out of Gandalf's grasp at the moment still baffled the new White Wizard of Middle-earth. The man could tip the scales on either side of this conflict because he was not from their world. The ability to wrest victory from defeat belonged to whoever had the mercenaries on their side, and regrettably, Naruto was currently siding with Saruman. For the time being, At least when Gimli looked cautiously at the people of Adoras, he observed that they were mostly elderly, thin, and pale. "You find more cheer at a graveyard," he said. The two ascended the stairs of Rohan King's Hall, but Grima Wormtongue ordered them disarmed before they could enter, so they had to use their cunning to get inside. Gandalf's staff, which he referred to as his walking stick, was the only weapon that he possessed. Given that he was elderly, he questioned the guard's honor in wanting to take it away from him. Gandalf remarked, "The courtesy of your hall seems to have lessened as of late." De copyright Odin, King of Rohan, as the fellowship's doors shut behind him. "Why should I welcome you?" Gandalf Stormcrow asked de copyright Odin, who appeared to be near death and would pass away at any second. Grima stepped in front of Gandalf and said, "A wise question, my lord. Late is the hour in which this conjurer claims to help us. He bring ill news and ill guests." Gandalf revealed his staff to Grima, who complained to his supporters in the room and ordered them to take the white wizard's staff. "Be silent. Keep your forked tongue behind your teeth. I did not travel through fire and death to speak to a worm like yourself," Gandalf said. Gandalf walked up to the man and said, "De copyright Odin, son of Thengel, too long have you walked lost in the shadows of your mind," as Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli surrounded him and defeated Grima's guards, who were there to protect him more than the king. With a booted foot on the black-robed man's stomach, Gimli easily defeated Grima and glared down at Saruman's servant. "I would stay right here if I were you," he said. Gandalf said, "I release you from your prison," with his eyes closed and a hand extended. Just to hear giggling brutal laughter escaped the king's lips. De copyright Odin mockingly remarked, "You have no power here, Gandalf the Grey," and that's when Gandalf realized that Saruman had used his abilities to turn the king into his puppet, while Grima had weakened the man's once strong mind. The king was compelled to push his body back against his throne as Gandalf instantly took off the grayish robe and used amazing power to shine a bright white light throughout the room. Gandalf used his strength to break Saruman's hold on de copyright Odin, saying, "I shall draw you, Saruman, as poison is drawn from a wound." The two wizards quickly engaged in a power struggle. Saruman resisted Gandalf's power and was pushed back roughly by his former friend's power, which he felt all the way back in Isengard. "If I go, then de copyright Odin dies," Saruman said through the king's mouth. Gandalf asserted, "You did not kill me and you will not kill him," strengthening his effort to break de copyright Odin free from Saruman's hold. Saruman resisted further, saying, "Rohan is mine," before the king's back was pushed back even more forcefully. Knowing that Saruman's hold was waning, Gandalf yelled, "Be gone." De copyright Odin's body arose from his throne with a roar of rage, trying to strike out at Gandalf, but the newly resurrected white wizard struck the king's face with his staff, and the power of the blow spread from the man to Saruman. The force of Gandalf's blow knocked the white wizard of Isengard back, and he realized that his old, former friend might have outstripped him in strength. As Naruto helped the man up and noticed the blood streaming down his face from the blow, he asked, "What happened?" Saruman remarked, "It appears that Gandalf has made a comeback to the world of the living and is now a white wizard like myself. King de copyright Odin is no longer under my control," as Naruto briefly gave him a startled look. After observing Saruman nod slowly, Naruto said, "I see. Well, that just means we'll just have to speed up our timetable in crushing Rohan sooner than later." Saruman then proceeded to find a way to stop the blood from streaming down his forehead. Regarding Gandalf, he regained his abilities and witnessed King de copyright Odin change from a sickly elderly man to a younger, more powerful monarch that the populace remembered. As the mentally restored king of Rohan glared angrily at him, Grima watched in horror from his downed position, knowing that his plans to claim Eowyn as his own had ultimately failed. The people in the hall bowed to him despite his somewhat soiled appearance. De copyright Odin had marched down the stone steps leading to the Great Hall of Rohan after being flung out of it, and he was not in the mood to listen to Grima's vile and deceptive words. Surprisingly, Aragorn intervened to stop the king of Rohan from striking Grima down, deciding that too much blood had already been shed in this situation for any more to be shed today. Now that he had the opportunity to escape, Grima took his horse and rode to Isengard to consult Saruman about his next course of action. When de copyright Odin heard about the death of his son, who had fought valiantly on the battlefield like his father and his father before him, the man could only cry. De copyright Odin wept more at his son's grave when he was informed that the demon fox mercenary was the culprit. He knew that his only child had been killed by such a creature, and that only Gandalf had survived to offer consoling counsel during this time of grief. Upon returning to the Hall of Rohan, Gandalf informed King de copyright Odin of the limited amount of terror Saruman had caused his realm and advised him to take action before it was too late. But after everything that had transpired, de copyright Odin did not want to risk an open conflict with Saruman, so he decided to go with defense rather than attack. Taking his people to Helm's Deep was the only way to save them. 2 days later, Isengard. Grima wiped the blood from his lips after arriving in Isengard to speak to Saruman about how he barely survived his escape and said, "The copyright Odin will not stay at Adores. He knows it's not safe for his people to stay there. They will go to Helm's Deep. It's a long dangerous path that will take many days to make, as they will have women and children with them." After listening to Hinata's pleas for him for 2 more days, Naruto was not impressed. He was glaring at Grima with glowing red eyes and attempting to control his anger. Her short list of options was nearly exhausted, and she was doing everything she could to prevent this atrocity from occurring, short of killing herself. Knowing that the fewer Rohan's people there were, the better off he would be and the closer his side would be to winning, Saruman himself grinned at this Grima's news. Ignoring Naruto's sour attitude to concentrate on the task at hand, the White Wizard descended from his perch high in the tower and visited the orc Sharku, who commanded the wards. In the deep areas beneath Isengard there, he discovered that they were ravenous for blood. Saruman exclaimed, "Send out your warg riders," after noticing the orc's ruthless grin and realizing that Sharku felt the same way about his animals. They couldn't wait to taste man flesh. 4 days after Helm's Deep. Many people who had sought shelter in the great fortress believed that Saruman's battle with the warg riders would be a huge victory, but the news of Aragorn's passing was even more devastating. However, they were taken aback when, just a few days later, they saw Aragorn riding a horse back up the winding path to the fortress doors, looking worse for wear. The copyright Odin was shocked to learn that Aragorn had made it here and survived. "So Isengard is now empty of its army. How many?" he asked. 10,000 strong at least, Aragorn remarked as the copyright Odin gave him a disbelieving look. Aragorn nodded as the copyright Odin asked, 10,000? Simply put, it is an army built for a single purpose: to destroy the world of men, Aragorn was saying. "The Woodland Realm," Haldir said, "My lady?" as he appeared in front of Galadriel and noticed the elf queen distantly staring. "The army of Isengard is on the move. It's being led to Helm's Deep, led by the demon fox mercenary, who has hatred in his heart, and intends to release it upon those that have taken refuge at the fortress of Rohan. I have looked into his soul, I have seen his desires, and the ache that dwells within it for the one he loves. The pain this girl will soon face is more than either can stand, and it is driving this man slowly mad with rage over not being able to save her from this darkness. He will do whatever it takes to be back in his world, to be with this woman, even if it means ending ours, and letting Sauron rise again," said Galadriel, seeing the warrior appear perplexed. Haldir asked, "What do we do, my lady?" after observing the elf queen's uncertainty. Galadriel sensed Elrond's sentiments throughout Rivendell and asked, "Do we let those that we once called allies perish? Do we let them die a slow death while we slowly wilt away to the undying lands?" Despite the man's daughter's intense love for Aragorn, the elf lord would not permit their union until the man demonstrated his legitimacy as king of Gondor. Galadriel showed Elrond what she had imagined Naruto seeing: the woman, who reminded him of Arwen in one way, and the mercenary, who was similar to Aragorn in another. The two elves had no doubts that the White Wizard was using his influence to further fuel such things, and the only difference between them was that Naruto was a demona, not voluntarily, of course, but those instincts were pushing the man behind it to support Saruman. The elf queen now turned to face her faithful servant. "We must help them fight beside them, if only for one last time before we fade away," Elrond said, sensing Galadriel's full agreement. Galadriel saw Haldir nod and left to gather a regiment of elves. "Take as many elves as you can, Haldir. Go to Helm's Deep and fight for those worthy of the last alliance between elves and men," Galadriel said. Deep nightfall by Helm. As the enormous army of Uruk-hai strode noisily toward the walls of the magnificent fortress of Rohan, the copyright Odin could see Naruto standing atop a rock formation through the dark clouds that covered the sky as the vast army ceased gazing at the opposing army behind the wall, which was made up of both men and elves plus one dwarf. He was joined by another Uruk-hai howling and brandishing its sword while yelling for blood in its own primitive language. It was beginning to rain by this time. As the rain continued to pour, Naruto himself pulled out the chair he had borrowed from Isengard and took a seat. While attempting to control his anger during the protracted march to Helm's Deep, Naruto came dangerously close to turning into his predecessor, a demon fox, and eradicating these people. However, the vast Uruk-hai army surrounding him was designed for this and chose to allow them to prove their existence by carrying out their innate abilities. Naruto pulled out his pipe and said, "How fitting that it would rain, no doubt to wash the blood away we are about to spill," before puffing on it. The copyright Odin said, "He's here, Theodred's killer," after noticing the man smoking a pipe and looking into his bright red eyes. "My king," remarked one of his fellow Rohirrim, "he's too far out of the archer's range." The copyright Odin said, Good, I will enjoy killing him myself with my own blade, relishing the taste of his sword piercing the man's flesh and bringing the mercenary to his demise. Now the Uruk-hai were roaring, slamming their fists against their armored chests, stomping about in a frenzied manner, hungry for blood. From the tower of the fortress of Rohan, a lone arrow was fired, striking an Uruk-hai strikingly at the neck region where the armor and helmet separated. Naruto remarked, "That was interesting," realizing that it had only made the Uruk-hai army even more enraged and that they were now yelling for retribution. The copyright Oden remarked, "So it begins," after observing what Naruto had seen. Naruto said, "Time to spill blood," raising his free hand and loudly snapping his fingers, which caused the Uruk-hai to issue the battle cry and charge the adversary. Up on the front of the wall, Aragon was speaking in Elvish and telling them to get their bows and arrows ready. Legolas followed suit, pointing out where to hit the armor's openings when they were within range of the swarming mass of Uruk-hai. Aragon ordered them to fire in order to destroy the seemingly endless army of Uruk-hai that continued to charge directly over their fallen brothers. The copyright Oden commanded his line to fire a barrage of arrows from their positions, eliminating Uruk-hai after Uruk-hai with each arrow in their arsenal. However, the Uruk-hai did not defeat the enemy without capturing some of them. They retaliated with their own arrows, killing a number of elves and men with lethal precision despite the severe losses they had already sustained. The Saruman army was able to capture them while the copyright Oden army was unable to, and each one that was killed caused them great pain. Aragon exclaimed in Elvish, "Ladders," as the mass of Uruk-hai approached the wall's base outside the shooting range. Gimli wanted to join in on the action, so he said, "Send them to me." Legolas was taking it all in stride by shooting them from a distance. Naruto told himself, Phase 1 of the plan is now complete. Now for Phase 2, as he watched his Uruk-hai set up the ladders and engage the enemy up close. Naruto was aware that it was merely a diversion. After the two things were in position, it would be time to light the big surprise, and Thena Woe. Though the copyright Oden initially felt a sense of dread as Saruman's forces approached, he was not impressed by their siege of this great fortress of Rohan. They were winning the battle so far, even more so when the elves joined in with their forces at the beginning, and they knew that the best way to win was to hold out through this siege. With the hope that Saruman would be able to hear his sarcastic remarks, the copyright Oden asked himself, "Is this it? Is this all you can conjure, Saruman? A massive army that fights like rabid animals without any sense of strategy? No matter how much force you have, this fortress can repel you, and your loyal demon servant." Even though the storm was raging all around them and his eyes were burning red, Naruto managed to hear what the king of Rohan had to say. It made Naruto think of the people in the Leaf who used to make fun of him when he was a child, believing that he was a stupid demon who couldn't tell his head from his ass and that he couldn't defeat Neji in his match in the Chunin exam finals. His chakra began to gradually appear all over his body as a result of the memories of that suffering and the laughter those people were sharing at his mate's expense. "King of Rohan, you will undoubtedly die, and I will enjoy it just as much as I enjoyed your son's death." After thinking this, Naruto got up from his chair, placed it in the summoning scroll, and produced his coveted bow staff, which turned into a glaive. Now was the moment to create some sound with his crimson chakra covering his body. Naruto walked through the line of Uruk-hai, giving them more than enough room to let him pass, signaling for the Uruk-hai berserker to start his portion of the operation. Everyone, even Aragon, was easily distracted by it. As Uruk-hai ran toward the bombs Saruman had made to blow the wall to pieces, when the heir to the Gondor throne finally realized what was going to happen, it was too late. The Uruk-hai berserker dove into the water-filled hole with the torch and set off a huge explosion, just as Legolas and a few other elves, with their bows poised to shoot a line of arrows at Naruto in an attempt to kill the commander of the enemy army. Boom! From his vantage point, the copyright Oden watched in horror as Saruman's bombs destroyed the wall that was keeping the enormous enemy army at bay. He was also terrified as the realization set in a matter of seconds. The Uruk-hai would surge through the gap, overwhelm the opposition, and then advance to the center of the fortress to seize it. When Gimli saw the Uruk-hai approaching through the opening with their spears out to fend off any attack, he exclaimed, "Aragon!" and jumped down from above onto the unwary adversary to give his allies time to get off the ground and counter. Aragon exclaimed, "Gimli!" as he saw the dwarf emerge from the damp ground, Naruto now behind his friend, and the Uruk-hai still outside the wall. The dwarf was undoubtedly spared instant death when Naruto transformed his glaive into a bow staff and swung it forcefully against Gimli's helmeted head. Aragon caught his comrade in arms as he skidded back from the impact, and Naruto then gave the order for the elves to shoot their arrows at the Uruk-hai who was coming in from the opposite side of the demolished wall. The arrows flew precisely, but Naruto's proficiency with a bow staff was even more impressive. He spun the weapon to deflect the arrow, and he smiled at the stunned adversary in front of him. When Naruto saw Aragon preparing his sword, he asked, "Care to try again?" and gave the order for the others to charge the group. With their spears out to impale the charging elves and men attempting to repel them, Naruto and Aragon met midway to the Uruk-hai. Aragon was struggling to keep up with Naruto in battle because he had never faced a fighter with his level of skill, much less one that employed the kind of weapon the mercenary used against him. Naruto's use of his legs in fluid motion with the bow staff to further injure people was even more concerning. For the heir to the Gondor throne, a few elves attempted to join Aragon in combat, but the expert mercenary dispatched them without hesitation and went on to battle his initial foe as if no one had intervened. Eventually, Naruto was too fast to stop and used a swing of the bow staff to deliver a powerful blow to Aragon's stomach, sending him tumbling back against the ground. Something inside of Naruto made him pause and look at the man again just as he was about to strike the final blow that would destroy the future of the kingdom by bringing down Gondor's heir to its throne. The demon fox mercenary was drawn to the light of the she-elf Arwen's gift, seeing images flood his mind as the pendant's visions of Aragon brought back memories of Hinata. Apart from the eyes, Arwen resembled Hinata a lot. Naruto was unable to see the she-elf in all her beauty because it had been concealed from him during their meeting when they were taking Frodo to Rivendell. He heard the women's and children's cries deep within the mountains. Knowing that their time on Earth might soon come to an end, he felt a pain in his heart that he didn't think was possible, and Naruto was at a loss for what to do. "Naruto-kun, don't destroy them. My life is not worth the amount of blood that has been shed in the world you are currently in. Nothing they've done has incited your anger. Come to their aid. Naruto-kun, do it for me." Before dropping his weapon and grabbing his head in agony while letting out a demonic scream of pain, Naruto's head jerked back as though he had been violently struck by the words he knew belonged to his mate. They all stared in shock, fear, and surprise at the sight of Naruto struggling with himself, and the howl of it all but stopped the fighting on both sides. His soul cried out that Hinata would despise him if he killed innocent people to be with her, and the demon fox mercenary couldn't allow that to happen. However, the demonic fury that filled his heart demanded that the blood of his enemy be spilled. This turn of events startled Aragon, who scurried to his feet and grabbed his sword as his opponent was now engulfed in crimson energy that he had never seen before. The heir to the Gondor throne couldn't understand the words, "Hinata, my mate," and other phrases that he heard Naruto saying to himself and calling out to a non-existent woman. The scream of pain was unlike anything Aragon had ever heard because he could see that Naruto was screaming out of a mentality that was apparently beyond his understanding rather than from physical wounds, and the energy surrounding the demon fox mercenary was making the Uruk-hai extremely uneasy. However, if Aragon claimed that the scene in front of him wasn't horrifying and made his body shake with terror, he would be lying. "De copyright," Odin said, "by my family's ancestors, what is he?" As he saw his most battle-hardened Rohirrim shudder in terror and sensed the negative energy that seemed to be felt by everyone around him as well. Had he been haunted by his words? "Remember that you are the only woman I love, Hinata-chan, and that I will do anything you ask of me. No matter what happens, if this is what you want, I'll give it to you while still finding a way to get back to you. I will fulfill the promise I made," Naruto thought as he turned slightly to face the Uruk-hai, who was staring at him uneasily and now retreating from him out of fear. Naruto yelled and hurled a crimson chakra arm at the Uruk-hai gathered at the wall's opening, instantly wiping them out along with the entire army line behind them. Naruto remembered his arm and kicked up his bow staff, covering it with his power. This gave the impression that the weapon was covered in an unholy fire from the depths of hell, and the user was not hesitant to use it against the enemy. The Uruk-hai made another attempt to enter, initially apprehensive due to what they had witnessed, but they were still under orders and knew better than to defy the white wizard Saruman. Naruto spun his bow staff in a vertical upward swing, unleashing his power on the Uruk-hai. Those who survived the Crimson Power's consumption were flung back outside the wall after being attacked by the demon fox mercenary. The creatures on the wall gave up their battle with the elves and leapt to confront their treacherous commander. However, they were quickly knocked down and destroyed in a brutal show of violence. Gimli asked, "Has he gone mad?" after observing Aragon's inability to react to the sight of the carnage in front of them. As he performed the one-handed hand sign, Naruto exclaimed, "Enough! I don't have time of this demon style. Demonic dome jutsu." He then slammed one end of the bow staff onto the ground, launching its power into the air before spreading over the entire fortress of Rohan, extending from the top of the mountain behind him to the front of the damaged wall. The Uruk-hai attempted to breach the barrier Naruto had put up, but those who did so were quickly destroyed and unable to move forward as they had hoped. They had no choice but to wait for the barrier to fall, if it did, and then exact revenge on Naruto for his unexpected betrayal. The Namikaze realized he needed to explain himself after Naruto gradually withdrew his power and turned to face Aragon, who simply stared back in wonder when Legolas aimed an arrow at the man's skull and several other elves followed suit, with some of the men brandishing their swords. Naruto had to halt his approach. Aragon said, "Wait. Lower your weapons," after noticing that Naruto needed their assistance and that his eyes were blue rather than the blood-red ones that a demon possessed. After Aragon took a few steps and stood a few feet away from Naruto, Gimli exclaimed, "What? Why? You saw what he's done, what he can do." When Aragon saw the demon fox mercenary simply gaze at him with those weary eyes, he said, "Yes, I have seen all the more reason to speak to him in a civil manner, trust me, Gimli." Naruto said simply, "We need to talk," in a weary tone, and Aragon nodded. Gazing at the dome of demonic energy that kept out the Uruk-hai and, surprisingly, even the rain, Aragon said, "Yes, I think we do, young mercenary, what about this?" Naruto said, "Don't worry about it, the dome I put up covers the entire fortress with enough power to last until morning when the sun is rising," observing the doubtful expressions on the faces of Aragon's two companions. Gimli, who didn't like getting hit in the head and thrown into someone he thought of as a friend, asked suspiciously, "And how can we guarantee that this dome of yours will last through the night like you claim?" Naruto remarked, "I could always take it down and let the Uruk-hai have another go at you," after observing that the group appeared somewhat uneasy about facing that army after having only been given time to recuperate from this crucial battle point. Aragon looked at Gimli and said, "That will not be necessary, so as not to incite Naruto to do so." Naruto said, "De copyright Odin will not be pleased to see me considering I was the one responsible for killing his son in battle," as the king of Rohan gave him a furious look. Naruto was right when he said that de copyright Odin would not be pleased to see him, perhaps, but he will have to put that aside for now if we are to survive and live through the night, Aragon said as they headed to the hall area of the fortress of Rohan. De copyright Odin ordered his men to gather whatever they could to create a barrier of some sort to compensate for the loss of the natural rock that was destroyed in the explosion. "Aragon, can you please tell me why you have brought this demonic entity up here rather than taking his head clean off?" he asked. After putting his valuable weapon away, Naruto sat down at a nearby table. "Naruto has something to say, something I think we all need to hear," Aragon said as they entered the hall. "First, I want to say that I'm sorry for killing you, son Theodred. I was ordered to by Saruman so you would continue to be his mindless puppet. Thanks to Grima Wormtongue, Theodred died a warrior on the battlefield. He was a true member of the Rohirrim, worthy of being called your son," said Naruto as de copyright Odin continued to look rage. De copyright Odin said, "Thank you for saying that," trying not to get angry when he heard it, even though it was obvious that the king of Rohan wanted to kill this creature in front of him. "You're welcome. As to why I'm here, Saruman wanted me to lead the army I've kept from advancing further to eliminate Rohan's existence, and then no doubt have them advance on Gondor next. From its king all the way down to the last child with Rohan blood in its veins is to be destroyed. Those are the orders given to the Uruk-hai outside." Grima told Saruman of the one weakness of the wall, which was the drain, and made a device when triggered by fire to have explosive capabilities that you all saw clear as when lightning flashes in the darkness, said Naruto as the others around him nodded. Aragon, who didn't understand Naruto at all in that regard, said, "Why did you serve Saruman from the start? I see a man of honor in you," and the Namikaze was aware of this. "Because when I first came here to your world on accident, it was Saruman the White Wizard, who found me on the steps of Isengard, and taught me what I needed to survive in this place. Where I am from, Aragon, my honor demanded I pay back the debt I owe to the White Wizard at any time should he wish to call upon my services, and do what he asked of me. At the time of his helping of my person, Saruman was not your enemy, and was the noble man everyone respected back during the height of his greatness. I take my honor seriously, and for that reason I could not deny him my service for whatever side he chose, for that is the nature of a mercenary," said Naruto, seeing Aragon understanding what he was referring to. Aragon asked, "What exactly happened out there to make you act like you did?" He had been extremely lucky to survive that, and it was a miracle that Naruto hadn't killed him. Seeing the man tense, Naruto asked, "Do you love her, Aragon? Do you love Arwen?" Legolas asked, "What does your question have to do with his own?" after observing Naruto remove his straw hat and then sighing wearily. "I ask because his answer is the same as my own for my mate waiting for me back home in my world that pendant you wear. It made me see things about your relationship that reminded me of my own love, who is strong and fierce when it comes to protecting their loved ones." I could hear her plea to not do what I had set out to do and to not let my rage over what is happening in my own world affect my mind here, Naruto said as the men around him nodded in compassion. As Naruto nodded, Gimli remarked, "This woman means more to you than your own life." She is my life, Master Dwarf. She is to me what the Ring of Power is to Sauron, only on a more pure level. One cannot live without her. If you knew everything about my life up until now, you would understand my rage, my pain, and why I wish to return home to the one I love," said Naruto as he leaned back in his chair, tired at the moment. Given that Naruto might become a more enduring ally following this, Aragorn asked, "Would you tell us? To help better understand your situation, maybe we can help you get home, in exchange for Naruto going home." Naruto said, "Very well, this is the truth of my life, everything," as he described his world, the elemental countries, the use of chakra, the Kyuubi, the sealing his own father had done on him to protect the village, and the abuse that ensued from the very villagers in spite of his father's final request. He filled them in on everything, knowing that Naruto had endured so much suffering for something that wasn't his fault. Even the copyright Odin was unable to harbor hatred toward the man in front of him. Aragorn remarked, "I had no idea such madness," after noticing Naruto nodding his gaze. "Yes, madness. Now my future mate is being forced into an arranged marriage, with a man several times her age, and all for political reasons. None of you have experienced such a thing. But I know that if you did, rage would fill your heart, and would do just about anything to stop such a thing from happening," stated that seeing Aragorn admit such an agony was unfathomable. Aragorn asked, "What will you do now?" after observing Naruto considering his options. Seeing hope in the eyes of those around him, Naruto said, "I do not know. What I do know is that I cannot serve Saruman anymore. I have paid back my debt to him." Aragorn, aware that Naruto might be a strong ally against the Dark Lord, said, "You could join us in battling Sauron." Gimli saw Naruto smile a little beneath the cloth the man was wearing to cover his face. "I agree with your help. This war will be over soon, and we can focus on getting you back to your world," Gimli said. "Thank you, both of you. However, I will not serve either side. This conflict between you and the Dark Lord is your life's journey. My path is elsewhere. I will not be your enemy, but I cannot be your ally either in this, and I will not be a living weapon to be used for this conflict. I will assist you tomorrow when the sun rises in the coming hours, as well as destroy the army I left here, and pay Saruman a visit. However, I will do nothing more after that to shift things on either side. When I leave your service, the sides will be equal, and the conflict will be fought with nearly equal strength. The side that prevails will be the one that desires it more than the other." Though the group acknowledged that the copyright Odin was correct, Naruto simply grinned, demonstrating that the mercenary knew something they did not. "What do we do about Saruman? The White Wizard could breed more of these creatures even if we stop the ones here," the copyright Odin said. As Legolas and even King the copyright Odin nodded, Naruto remarked, "Saruman should know not to fool with nature. I assume you know what Isengard looked like before he began to make the Uruk-hai?" Legolas remarked, "The place was alive with trees and life. Now there are only orcs and death," after Naruto nodded once more. With an eye toward the elf, Naruto said, "Yes, from what I recall from the things I've heard during my years traveling throughout Middle-earth, I know that nature can take on a life of its own, and can be rather vengeful when given the right motivation." The master archer then realized that Saruman was going to be attacked by something related to nature itself. The massive tower fortress was nearly empty without the mass of Uruk-hai at Isengard, and Naruto was aware of a force that could make the White Wizard pay for his disregard for the natural world. Knowing that the White Wizard's defeat would be a memorable sight, Aragorn said, "After the battle here at Helm's Deep is over, we should pay Saruman a visit. You are assuming we will win even if we rebuild a strong enough wall. The Uruk-hai outside will overpower it, and if not the wall, then the gate will be breached in its place," the copyright Odin said, aware that even though the gate's wood was sturdy, a mass of Uruk-hai could smash through it and take the fortress as a result. Naruto put his hat on his head and stood up from his chair, "And that King of Rohan is where I come in, and give you the edge in battle tomorrow morning. I will slice through the enemy, and help you attain your victory," he said. Given how exhausted Naruto was, Gimli asked, "Are you sure you can that Master Namikaze?" He would prefer his new temporary ally to fight for them with all of their might. When Naruto noticed the copyright Odin's startled expression, he went outside to order what was already being done and have his troops try to come up with a way to stop the Uruk-hai from moving forward. "I can. Besides, the sun will be rising within the hour," Naruto said. "Gandalf will be here soon. He said so to me before leaving to find the king's cousin," Aragorn said, observing Naruto pondering for a while. Naruto stated, "Good, I will attack from the front. Gandalf attacks from behind with his army. We just have to meet in the middle," understanding that the others could protect the wall from their positions while he faced the army's rear before the new White Wizard showed up. Aragorn said, "Let us ride out there with you and meet them," and the copyright Odin entered to listen. "For what? For glory?" the copyright Odin asked plaintively. Aragorn said, "For Rohan, for your people," as the king of Rohan watched thoughtfully. Being aware that nothing should be left to chance, Naruto asked, in the event this fails, is there any way for the women and the children to escape from the Uruk-hai? One of the bearded men of the king's Roverum stated, there are a series of passageways that lead into the mountains, but even if they did, the Uruk-hai are too many, and they would get far. The sun is rising, Gimli remarked as she watched it through the window. Aragon, aware that the more obstacles preventing the enemy from getting to those people, the better, said, send word for the women and children to head for the mountain pass and barricade the entrance. De Copyright Odin declared, the horn of Hammerhead will be heard in the deep one last time. Gimli responded, yes, at the thought of making such a magnificent thing heard during such a conflict. Naruto shook the man's hand and said, for what it's worth, I'm glad I get to fight beside you, Aragon. I have forgotten what it was like to embrace friendship. Aragon said, I understand. Good luck to you in battle, knowing that Naruto would get in their way and make it impossible for them to ride out. Naruto saw Aragon's smile and knew the she-elf had done that for him. You too, and do try to stay alive, Aragon. I would like to see you one day become the king of Gondor. It desperately needs, and see you marry that wonderful woman who has inspired you to do great things, Naruto said. Me too, Aragon remarked before witnessing Naruto exit the room and draw his preferred weapon for combat. I hope it's not his final fight. The barrier vanished as soon as Naruto reached the damaged wall, and the Uruk-hai once more charged forward, seeing their opportunity to shed the blood of the person who had betrayed them. However, their former commander denied them all the opportunity they wanted by using his bow staff to ruthlessly cut through them. He then switched it to the glaive and channeled chakra into it, causing the blade to sever all of the Uruk-hai in his immediate vicinity like a hot knife through butter. By this time, Aragon, Legolas, Gimli, and De Copyright Odin, as well as the other Roverum who could mount horses, rushed out of the gates, slicing through all of their enemies. Before they charged down the hill, Gandalf and Éomer appeared above on the enormous hill to the left of the enormous army of Uruk-hai, accompanied by a sizable army of Roverum mounted on horses. The Uruk-hai, who were ready with spears, were blinded by the bright light of the rising sun behind them, which also provided the horse riders with a way to avoid being skewered. Rasengan! Exclaimed Naruto as he pushed the Charka orb into an Uruk-hai, causing him to blow up all over the place. All of the Uruk-hai had been destroyed by the time the battle was declared over, and the winners were now covered in their adversaries' blood. Naruto turned to face Gandalf as the situation's reality set in, and he saw the man staring at him with calculating eyes. Although the others and the King of Rohan had helped them to some extent, it was evident that neither the White Wizard nor anyone else knew what to do with him just yet. When Gandalf saw the Demon Fox mercenary nod, he said, from the looks of things, you had a hand in Rohan's survival, and saving more lives than expected given the circumstances. He knew that many of the defenders of this place would have perished if it weren't for his abrupt change of allegiance. Naruto said, you could say that I've already spoken with Aragon about it along with De Copyright Odin. I'm not your enemy anymore, as he noticed Gandalf grinning as if he had anticipated it. Gandalf remarked, no, perhaps you never were. It's hard to say, as he watched Naruto put his weapon away. Naruto stated, you know this victory is but a small stepping stone to defeating Sauron, and not to be taken lightly, being aware that Sauron was aware that the Dark Lord would only become enraged if Rohan lost at Helm's Deep. As he and the others ascended the hill to see the thunderous form of Mordor behind the mountains that separated the volcanic region of Middle-earth from the rest of the realm, Gandalf said solemnly, yes, the battle for Helm's Deep is over. The battle for Middle-earth is about to begin. They could also see the orange fiery glow that raged behind them. On horseback, Naruto easily kept up with the group as they rode to Isengard, where they saw Saruman's war machine destroyed and the ancient tree herders of the forests known as the Ents had sacked the place. After witnessing what the vanquished White Wizard had done to the region surrounding the Ring of Isengard in order to construct his Uruk-hai army and what the Ents would do if they found out, Naruto smirked inwardly at the sight of it. Naturally, they were slow to discover Saruman's treachery, which Naruto was aware of because the creatures were whispering, and they had to witness the devastation before launching an offensive. Two hobbits sitting around eating and smoking on the Ents' field of victory was something that none of the group, including Naruto, expected at first. They were a little afraid of Naruto, but Gandalf reassured them that he was not a danger and that he had played a crucial role in the Uruk-hai army's defeat. Treebeard welcomed Gandalf as they arrived at the water-covered base of Isengard and informed them that Saruman was located high in the tower. Gimli said, well, let's take his head and be done with it, understanding that it would be better for Saruman to be dead than alive in case he rose again and caused a recurrence of this situation. Gandalf said, no, he has no power now, as he looked up to see his old friend frowning down at him from high above on the summit of Isengard. Naruto jumped up towards the tower and shocked everyone by saying, perhaps, but I like Gimli's idea better. Excuse me, before ascending the tower as if it were instinctive. As Naruto casually walked up the tower to Saruman, Aragon asked, "Where are you going, Naruto?" "To return a chair I borrowed," Naruto exclaimed, recognizing their perplexity. Gimli said, "And here I thought he was strange before," after noticing that Saruman was staring straight at the mercenary while Naruto was now halfway up Isengard. Saruman angrily yelled at the demon fox mercenary, "You betrayed me, Naruto, after all I had done for you all those years ago when all that was on your person was the clothing you wore," as he watched the man almost approach him. Naruto stands on horizontal ground on top of the tower, a few feet away from Saruman. "I paid my debt to you. I see that now there is nothing you have in your possession that could tempt me into fighting for you or Sauron anymore," he said. Saruman's voice was filled with hatred as he said, "Really? And do they have the means to send you home? I doubted I was going to help you return home after my conquest of Rohan was complete, but you chose to join the losing side, and lose your chance to be with the woman you love." Naruto struck the fallen white wizard in the neck with one of his daggers, knocked the man's staff out of his hands, causing it to fall below before shattering into a dozen pieces. Before hurling Saruman from the tower, Naruto said, "Should that be the case, Saruman, I will at least have the pleasure of knowing that you are not among the living to see, and enjoy the moment." This caused the man to collide with one of the spikes in the water wheel below. "Well, that's the end of that," Gimli remarked after witnessing the dead wizard's body sink into the murky water with the Palantir Pippin took had previously sought it out after noticing it glowing in the water. Gandalf said, "Pippin, give that to me, my boy," as he retrieved the Palantir from the hobbit and hid to prevent the Great Eye from snagging the halfling. Grima yelled, "Lord Saruman," as he watched his once great master plummet below, then gave Naruto a fierce look. Naruto remarked, he had it coming, after Grima tried to kill him with a dagger. Despite his victim's attempt to free it, Naruto managed to evade the slow attempt, disarm Grima, and use his own blade to stab the man in the throat without showing any sympathy for the little man. Naruto let Grima fall to the ground after watching the slowly dying man die in his arms. After finishing that, Naruto descended to join the others, who were observing him with concern. When Aragon saw Naruto pull out his pipe and start smoking, he asked, "What will you do now, Master Namikaze?" Seeing their shocked expressions, Naruto said, "I don't know, Saruman's dead, so is Grima. Would you mind if I took residence within Isengard for a while?" When de Copyright Odin saw Naruto shrug, he asked, "And how do we know you won't try anything like they did on my people?" "I don't want to crush Rohan under my boots, I just want to get home," Naruto said, with de Copyright Odin taking this information into consideration, knowing that was what he wanted most of all. "I'm not into the whole, take over Middle-earth thing like Sauron is." Gandalf gave him a scathing glance that made Naruto think of the Sandames when he was a kid and was caught pulling a practical joke. "I suppose the young mercenary deserves that much provided he keeps the thoughts of breeding an Uruk-hai army to destroy Middle-earth like Saruman did out of his mind," Gandalf said. However, once Naruto discovered the truth, neither those glares nor the one Gandalf was giving him had any influence over him. Naruto said, "As I said, Gandalf, I just want to go home," as the new White Wizard of Middle-earth nodded sympathetically. "Simply put, I'll hold you to that, young mercenary," Gandalf declares. "I'll be back to take in my new dwellings, but I would like to talk to you back at Adors about some important things regarding Sauron you need to hear, and hear it someplace without ears loyal to the Dark Lord hearing it too," Naruto said, observing de Copyright Odin's uncertain expression and the other's surprise. "Something involving Soren's plans?" Aragon asked, aware that they had to find out what the Dark Lord had planned for Middle-earth and prevent it from happening. "In a sense," Naruto said plainly as de Copyright Odin saw Naruto bow slightly, he said, "Then let's go back to Adors so you can tell us, and in return I invite you to join in our celebration for the victory over Saruman." "I would be honored," a smiling Naruto remarked. Sometime later, Adors, the night's activities were joyous since they were intended to commemorate the victory at Helm's Deep and the people who lost their lives. To bring it about, the Demon Fox mercenary made sure his presence was barely noticeable by sitting in the shadows of the room smoking pipe weed, drinking when it was convenient for him, and occasionally eating to satisfy his hunger. Many people were worried about Naruto attending this party. A short distance away, the two hobbits were singing and dancing on a table, making everyone laugh heartily. In a different area of the room, Eowyn was attempting to win Aragon's affection, who had graciously rejected her approach to get his attention, and establish a relationship of some kind. Naruto let out a sigh upon seeing that everyone was joyful and content tonight, devoid of any fear. Naruto thought, "They've earned that much," but then he noticed a young boy from his table staring at him and then turning away as he thought about something and wanted to talk to the young mercenary. Unexpectedly, the boy approaches him while a few others are looking on, terrified of what might happen. The long-haired boy, who was only a few years younger than Naruto and barely in his early teens, said, "Thank you for supporting us in the battle. Had you not fought the creatures, things could have been much worse." Naruto exhaled smoke from his pipe and said, "You're welcome, little one. What is your name?" Haleth said, "My name is Haleth, son of Hama," as Naruto nodded in acknowledgement of the name. When Naruto held out his hand and said, "My name is Naruto, son of Minato," the boy firmly shook his hand in return. Haleth asked, hoping he wasn't bothering the man, "May I sit down and ask you a question?" "Of course," Naruto said, gesturing for the boy to sit beside him. Haleth sat down next to the Demon Fox mercenary and asked inquisitively, "Why did you side with us during the battle? Your army was larger, stronger, and had just destroyed the wall at Helm's Deep, yet you just turned around and crushed the very enemy you were leading. Why?" Naruto remarked, "Because she would not love me if I continued on that path," while considering his partner. Haleth asked, "Who?" inquiring once more about the reason behind Naruto's abrupt change in strategy. "A woman, a very special woman," Naruto smiled as he spoke to himself. Unaware of Naruto's meaning, Haleth asked, "Is she an elf? Some kind of sorceress?" "No, though sometimes I wonder when I see that light shining around her. One day, you will understand when that special woman comes along, and your heart stops beating for more than 5 seconds. Your body will freeze up, your very eyes will be unable to look elsewhere, and your soul wishes to leave the body to be closer to her," said Naruto as Haleth appeared to be afraid of the idea. Haleth said, "I don't think I could let any woman like that bewitch me," which made Naruto laugh. He then patted the child on the back after ruffling his hair. Naruto said, "Don't be too sure, young Haleth. If that hadn't happened with your father finding that special woman in his life, then you might not be here now, and we wouldn't be having this conversation," as he saw the bewildered boy looking shocked. Haleth remarked, "I don't understand," after noticing Naruto grinning at him. After the party ended, Naruto said, "One day you will, young Haleth, one day you will ask one of the others about this. When you're older they'll help you understand what it means to be in love." He then left his chair and went to copyright Odin to ask the others to have a private conversation. He didn't want to ruin their good time, but it was over now, and it was time to start preparing for the next phase of the conflict. Naruto showed them a map of Middle-earth and the Dark Lord's plans after the hall was deserted and everyone had fallen asleep. The vast army was unlike anything the realms had ever seen, and he recalled what he saw the last time he was in Mordor after capturing Gollum, who had told Soren's forces about a person with the Baggins name who had the One Ring. Copyright Odin said, "So his army is vast, that means nothing," failing to see the wider picture. "Not just vast, copyright Odin, it's large enough to be split into two. While Saruman was to destroy Rohan from his position, Sauron is going to move his attention to Gondor and crush it with his own army. The idea was to fight the war on two fronts, so neither Rohan nor Gondor could help the other in their time of need for allied aid. In short, his plan is to divide and conquer with men weak on both fronts as it is now," said Naruto. Seeing the king of Rohan now had his full attention. With Naruto staring him in the eyes, Aragorn remarked, "Saruman's army was bad enough, but are you saying the Dark Lord's is even larger, and far worse? What Saruman threw at you at Helm's Deep was nothing compared to Soren's army that will march on Gondor's capital. You forget both Mordor and Gondor are neighbors to each other, with only the mountains dividing the lands, keeping the darkness from spreading quicker from it than it is now. When Sauron learns of Saruman's defeat at Helm's Deep, if he hasn't already, the Dark Lord will launch his army at Gondor out of fear of men not being so weak like he suspected, and wish to prevent any strength this realm has in opposing him rising to the surface," said Naruto as the others looked at him in disbelief. Copyright Odin asked, "And you know all of this, how?" inquiring as to how Naruto, who was separated from Saruman at the time of his plot with Sauron, knew what the Dark Lord was up to. Naruto simply looked Copyright Odin in the eyes, letting him know how serious this was, "Because that's how I would have done it," he said. "If that is the case, then the steward of Gondor must be warned, and his armies mobilized to fight this evil," Gandalf uttered, aware that he would have to ride to the White City and ensure that it was adequately defended. "Yes," Naruto said, pointing to the city of Osgiliath, stating that it was the key for the Dark Lord's army to capture before marching to the capital of Gondor. "But I'm sure Sauron has already started and begun the means to prepare for it. If I were Sauron, I would strike here first for the staging ground of the army to advance, and then head straight for the White City with no form of opposition." Gandalf saw Copyright Odin's thoughtful expression, which caused Naruto's eyes to narrow slightly. "They will need help of that much, as sure Gondor does not have the forces necessary to repel Soren's army, and if the beacons of Minas Tirith are lit, then Rohan must come to their aid," Gandalf said. It was the expression of conceit as the others stared at him in shock. The copyright Odin said, "Tell me, why should Rohan assist Gondor in their side of the war when they did not come to our aid?" With an eyebrow raised, Naruto asked, "You're kidding, right? I see no reason to send my army to Gondor to defend the White City," the copyright Odin said, as Naruto shook his head. "No army of Gondor came to Helm's Deep to defend us." When Naruto saw the copyright Odin staring at Aragon, he said, "You didn't get Gondor's army, but you got its future king, and one that has fought to the point of near death beside you every step of the way. Surely that counts for something." The copyright Odin had been in the middle of the fight at Helm's Deep. "I will not deny that Aragon has honored me with his friendship, or that it has brought us additional allies in the form of the elves and the master dwarf beside him. However, my people will not be so willing to join in this battle, as they wish to defend the kingdom of Rohan, and not die for another's unless it is a worthy cause. Even if they did, it would be just for one man, who may become its future king, but there is no guarantee so long as Sauron is alive, and his army is too vast to destroy," said the copyright Odin as he observed their depressed expressions. When Naruto saw the copyright Odin turning his head away to consider the situation, he said, "But if they were lit, surely your pride as a king would not deny them the aid they seek should they ask for it? If the beacon of Gondor were lit, would you answer the call?" Since he always believed the steward of Gondor was unworthy of his position and had only put up with him because of previous alliances, the copyright Odin said, "If the beacons were lit, Rohan would answer, and come to Gondor's aid, but I know the steward of Gondor well, and his pride in being in his position will not let him give such an order." "Leave that to me," said Gandalf, who would convince Denethor to agree with him and that it would be best to call for Rohan's assistance. In light of this, the group made the decision to go to bed and start organizing their strategy for dealing with Sauron the following day. However, considering Pippin's prior life experiences, the Hobbit's curiosity and the folly of a Took should not be undervalued. As Gandalf slept, the ever-fumbling idiot Hobbit removed the Palantir from its protective wrappings and came across the Dark Lord Sauron, who used his own to communicate with Saruman. As the Dark Lord launched his mental attack on the halfling and discovered everything the Took knew, Pippin let out a painful scream. Before the others could react, Naruto woke up first, snatched the orb from the Hobbit, and bore the brunt of the Dark Lord's mental attack. As Naruto gazed at Soren's fiery red eye inside the Palantir, he noticed that it resembled Kyuubi's when they were still distinct beings and that its power was indeed remarkable. Sauron said, How dare you and Saruman take my ring from me?" despite being well aware of Naruto's identity. "I don't have the ring of power, Sauron, neither does Saruman, since he's dead thanks to me," Naruto remarked, observing Sauron grow more irate. Sauron asked, "What?" in an attempt to delve deeply into Naruto's thoughts, but the mercenary managed to keep him out of it and use his strength to drive the Dark Lord away. Naruto said, "Yeah, you should thank me though, since he kind of wanted the One Ring for himself and become ruler over Middle-earth," as he watched the great eye of Sauron grow more and more irate by the second. Sauron asked, "Then where is it? Where is my ring of power?" after noticing Naruto's composed gaze on the Dark Lord. As Naruto saw the great eye appear almost frightened by this news, he said, "Don't know, I don't have it though. If I were you, I'd get started on your invasion of Gondor, and prepare for the return of its king." Sauron exclaimed, "No such king of Gondor exists," as he noticed Naruto grinning back. Seeing Soren's gaze, Naruto asked, "Oh really? Who do you think helped Rohan win at the Helm's Deep against Saruman's 10,000-strong Uruk-hai army?" Sauron said, "So there is one left," but he was speaking more to himself than to Naruto. Naruto said, "As I said, you should probably have your army move out, and crush Gondor before its king ascends the throne to rally all of Middle-earth against your forces. You know he will." Before cutting off his communication with Sauron and acting as though he had been stung, Gandalf then covered the orb with a blanket to prevent the Great Eye from using its power on anyone else. Gandalf was furious with Pippin and exclaimed, "Fool of a Took." However, he was halted when he realized the Hobbit was in a catatonic state of terror and had to use his power to rescue him. The White Wizard had the group reassemble with the copyright Odin after Gandalf had rescued Pippin from his condition, and he discovered that Sauron had not gained any knowledge from the stupid Hobbit. They did discover, however, that Sauron had a sizable army that was more formidable than Saruman's at his disposal, and that he was in fact preparing an impending attack on the White City. Naruto told them that the Dark Lord was able to discover some of the information the Demon Fox mercenary had about Soren's plans for the White City of Gondor and the potential return of a king to the throne of Minas Tirith, just as Pippin had discovered some of the same. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The idea was to keep both sides focused on each other so Naruto could start making plans of his own to obtain what he needed. In order to talk to Denethor before this issue blew up in their faces, Gandalf took Pippin to Minas Tirith in the morning and proceeded directly to the barn where his horse Shadowfax was waiting for him. Naruto made the decision to travel to Isengard and freely examine its contents. Naruto walked on the water that still encased the ring around Isengard and said, "Hello Treebeard," to the enormous ent in front of him. Treebeard said, "Greetings, young mercenary, come take a look within your new home, I take it," as he watched Naruto make his way to the entrance to Isengard. As the ent nodded its head in comprehension, Naruto remarked, "Correct, I'll be very busy looking through the tower, so if you see me doing anything in or outside of the tower, it's because of my own changes to the place." Treebeard remarked, "I look forward to seeing this place once more grow with life again, so many new friends to make after losing so many old ones," reflecting on the power of this water to revive the life that Saruman had literally uprooted from the surrounding soil. Naruto declared, "I know Treebeard, so die," as he entered Isengard and formed an army of shadow clones to spread out and handle the situation here while he surreptitiously followed the corridor inside the tower that led straight down to the once great war machine that Saruman had constructed to breed the Uruk-hai. Although nearly everything needed to create the Uruk-hai had been washed away by the majority of the water, Naruto had ensured that it was not completely lost by reserving a small portion for his own use and using seals he had created to secure the spawning pool when he was here covertly behind the fallen wizard's back. Since Saruman was unaware of what was going on here or what Naruto was planning, he hid it in a genjutsu. In contrast to the previous breeding areas that occupied this space, Naruto had his seals alter this one when it was sealed up in order to alter the way things were carried out and the Uruk-hai spawning in contrast to the others. This spawning pool he made was capable of producing Uruk-hai after Uruk-hai at his command while feeding off his chakra to cause them to grow. It also wasn't limited to Uruk-hai. Naruto only had to place a sample of a species such as skin, blood, or any other kinda into the spawning pool before he could use his chakra to summon the creature of his choosing to play the original return to the tower to look at the various treasures Saruman had accumulated over the years, while they created another army of shadow clones and began implementing his plan. A few days later, after telling Treebeard that he had some business to attend to and would be gone for a short while, Naruto left Isengard feeling more at ease today. A shadow clone had stealthily removed a fragment of the leg's bark and carried it down to the spawning pool below, where it was absorbed without the old ENT's knowledge. The Palantir, a dark orb in the Tower of Isengard, glowed a little because of the seals that improved it and changed its original function from being an all-seeing stone to something more. Now that it was linked to the gradually expanding spawning pool, this specific Palantir was in a class by itself, and only Naruto could use it with his demonic chakra. In order to manipulate into creating devoted followers and allow them to grow by feeding on his chakra, Naruto only needed to use his chakra on the orb to connect to the spawning pool whenever he wanted to spawn something naturally. He couldn't allow that to occur just yet because it would take a lot of his power to make Sauron, the elves, and Gandalf grow, and they would all sense its use. That was not possible for Naruto, knowing that the mountains made travel difficult and that the Dark Lord's army was a huge sight to behold. Naruto moved swiftly across the open grass fields that would soon be encircled by Soren's minions, who would be laying siege to Minas Tirith the following day. Taking a knee on the hill where he stood, the Demon Fox mercenary saw Osgiliath in ruins. It was probably crippled in a battle earlier during Rohan's own struggle for survival, leaving the area for Sauron to occupy before starting his siege of Gondor's capital. The Demon Fox mercenary pulled out his pipe and started smoking some more of the cannabis he carried around as he considered his next move, since it was impossible to support either side in this conflict. Naruto had every intention of remaining neutral for the sake of Middle-earth, or at least until a certain point. "I got the blood sample you wanted from the elves. Wasn't easy," a shadow clone of Naruto said. He had successfully hidden his tracks after obtaining some elf blood from Rivendell. Before making his way to Isengard, Naruto nodded with his shadow clone and said, "No doubt, take it to the spawning pool, but don't let the ants see you and what you're carrying." He had nearly everything he required. He only needs a few more samples and one more item to complete his vision. With Pippin, Took and Gandalf. When Pippin saw the white wizard puffing on his pipe and gazing out at the mountain that served as the border between Gondor and Mordor, he said, "Gandalf, may I ask you a question concerning the Demon Fox mercenary?" Gandalf asked, "What about?" after noticing Pippin's contemplative expression about the mercenary. Pippin approached Gandalf and remarked, "It's just that the man wants to go home, but he has no way to do it, and I wonder if it's possible for him to get home to his world." Although Naruto was not always a demon, Gandalf expressed his fear that the demonic power within his body was slowly destroying his soul and causing him to lose his sense of honor. He knew that the man was dangerous, but the White Wizard was unable to deal with it and did not want the Demon Fox mercenary to become a future issue for Middle-earth. "I myself have never tried to tear open dimensional rifts to other worlds. as it has always been considered forbidden for a reason, some places even I cannot venture. After observing Gandalf ponder for a while, Pippin asked, but if you could do it to get him home, would it be possible, and send Naruto back home to his world? Gandalf saw Pippin's sadness and said, it could be possible, but the energies required would have to be dark and sinister since those were the energies used to create the rift, so it will be to bring him back there. Seeing Gandalf nod, Pippin remarked, so you're saying that only someone like Sauron or his Ring of Power could grant him that? Knowing that if Naruto finds a way to return home, his neutrality in this conflict might change, Gandalf said. Unfortunately, so by the time Naruto does learn of this, the Ring of Power will either be destroyed, or in Soren's hands with all of Middle-earth consumed in a second darkness. Seeing the grim expression on Gandalf's face, Pippin remarked, well, it's not like Soren's going to win or anything. I mean, Gondor had a pretty well-trained army, has high walls, and now has the White Wizard that has to count for something, right? When Gandalf said, there is one weapon at Soren's disposal that he has yet to unleash fully on Middle-earth, a being that is said no man can kill the Witch King of Angmar. You met him before when he stabbed Frodo on Weathertop. Pippin's face turned pale as he recalled the terrible event. With Gandalf nodding, Pippin remarked, so it's going to be pretty close, anticipating a close battle and an even closer victory. Yes, Gandalf said, aware that if Sauron prevailed, everything would be lost and Rohan would undoubtedly follow. Even with my powers, the people of Gondor may not survive, and the White City will be forever stained in blood, he said. A huge tower of light erupted into the sky from Minas Morgul's location before either the wizard or the hobbit could say anything more. Fields, Pelennor. 2 days later, the entire terrain in front of the Minas Tirith was covered as the great army of orcs, mountain trolls, and the Witch King of Angmar on his winged beast advanced on the White City. Watching from the walls are Gondor soldiers, who see this enormous army with siege towers, catapults, and a battering ram shaped like a demonic wolf as Gothmog, the orc commander, watches Minas Tirith and then the Witch King. Drums were heard to keep the army moving. Gondor will fall soon, the Witch King declared. Knowing that the White Wizard was the only one capable of facing the Witch King on an even playing field, Gothmog asked, what of the White Wizard? Witch King tightened his metal gauntlets around his beast's reins and declared, I will break him. Naruto sat in a chair, smoking his pipe, and watched the army march from the sidelines, taking in the events that were about to take place. Actually, before continuing and allowing this fight to continue, he required a sample of blood from multiple creatures present. For starters, the orcs themselves were a breed apart from the typical mindless rabble, and those armored mountain trolls would be pleasant to have around. They weren't Uruk-hai that Saruman created, but they were very useful when his Uruk-hai line was dwindling and cannon fodder was needed, since they would be useful back home and instill fear in Konoha. He would also not mind owning the fell beast that the Witch King of Angmar was riding. Now, the question was, how could he obtain the samples he required? I didn't think it would be simple, as Naruto created a shadow clone and put on a henge to make himself appear like an orc before letting it infiltrate the army, he thought, but let's see if the orcs can tell me from one of their own, and see through my illusion. Even though they were unable to identify the cause, the orcs were aware that something was wrong because they could smell the shadow clone's scent differing from their own. The shadow clone in disguise quickly obtained the sample required for the spawning pool back in Isengard after a swiftly dispatched orc at the rear of the army where no one really looked when Konoha was about to be destroyed. It would also be beneficial to use orcs to help tame the wargs that would soon be created and used against the elemental countries. This would give the Inuzuka clan a whole new breed of dog to dread. When the battle started, Naruto's thoughts on this came to an end as the orcs launched boulders and used catapults against the White City. They didn't care if they hit their targets or missed, because if they destroyed some of the walls, the level below would collapse, killing or seriously wounding the people of Gondor. The trolls, being the ideal creatures to get the siege towers into position and attack Gondor's soldiers, were pulling the towers into position to take the lowest level of the city walls as the catapults attacked the Minas Tirith. But instead of letting Minas Tirith disappear into the night, Gandalf gave the order for the White City's own catapults to retaliate, striking several siege towers, orcs, and nearly hitting the orc commander. The Nazgul on fell beasts swooped down on the White City in retaliation, attacking multiple catapult installations and seizing troops on higher levels before executing them below. The siege towers that managed to reach the wall were teeming with bloodthirsty orcs who attacked Gondor soldiers mercilessly, slashing, hacking, and even biting them with the ferocity of a savage animal. Once more, during the siege, Naruto transformed a shadow clone into an orc and approached the heavily armored mountain orcs. As it turned out, The mountain troll in question became enraged when he stabbed at one of their legs to obtain the sample, causing a flurry of commotion. The hanged shadow clone had hardly a chance to flee among the throngs of orcs while the orc commander was occupied with soothing the enraged beast. Soon after, night fell on the White City as the siege persisted and the Sauron army failed to make the progress the orc commander had hoped for. Gothmog made the decision to use the Grand battering ram against Minas Tirith's seemingly impregnable gate in order to make up for the time and troops lost during the siege. The goal was to take the city one level at a time. When the gate finally drops, Gandalf is shocked to see the orcs behind them now swarming like a plague to overwhelm the enemy, while the heavily armored mountain trolls storm in first, easily beating Gondor soldiers away with arrows because their armor only slows them down. When the city's first level was eventually lost, the White Wizard gave the order to retreat to the next level so they could better defend their position. While all of this was going on, Naruto remained seated in his chair on the grassy hill near the battleground, watching and doing nothing to stop it. Since his plans were already in action, Naruto couldn't have any more direct involvement because that would mean that both sides would be looking at him. They would become suspicious of him as a result, and they might go to Isengard to find out more about what was going on in the tower or beneath it, where Saruman had bred his army. At first, they wouldn't find anything because of the water there, which, ironically, was a major factor in Naruto having so much of it to make the spawning pool strong and enable life to grow there. The seals surrounding the spawning pool and the genjutsu positioned nearby would temporarily conceal anything they might suspect. Although the Namikaze suspected that the Ring of Power held the secret to Naruto's return home, it was not necessary to throw it into the fires of Mountain Doom to kill Sauron and liberate Middle-earth, as many believed everyone was too preoccupied with attacking the body's symbolic container to consider using the One Ring to attack Soren's spirit and destroying the Dark Lord in this manner. The dark power of Soren's spirit, which the various creatures of Middle-earth could not easily defeat, was, of course, the reason no one had tried that. If they had, the invading spirit would have been overpowered by Soren's, and the Dark Lord would have destroyed the person, who would then have died. But Naruto's spirit was no less powerful than Soren's, and he was aware that the Dark Lord secretly feared the Demon Fox mercenaries' strength. As night gave way to day, it appeared that the Mordor army was about to triumph and that the White City would be engulfed in the blood of its citizens. The adage, "It's darkest just before the dawn," is among the oldest and most accurate, but the dawn has already come. Because when de Copyright Odin led the great army of Rohan's Rohirrim to emerge, the people of Minas Tirith's hope rose with the sun. Naturally, Naruto was on the opposite side of them. He grinned at the Rohirrim's excellent timing and taking it down before laughing as expected. De Copyright Odin inspired his troops in a manner befitting any king of Rohan, and the vast army charged the orcs. Now aware that they might be in grave danger, they had no practical means of preventing the Rohirrim from flanking them and drastically cutting down their numbers because so many soldiers were moving directly into the Minas Tirith. Naruto, meanwhile, was giggling uncontrollably in his chair at this development, declaring that it was simply too ideal and that he loved the way things were going. When the army of orcs was fleeing back to Mordor and a new, much more formidable threat of the Mumakula was approaching the Rohirrim from the far horrid jungles, his smile grew. The Rohirrim were losing a lot of their soldiers to the enormous animals, but the men's forces were unflinching, striking at the animals' enormous legs, hurling arrows at their leaders, and ultimately defeating them. However, it was almost inevitable that victory would come with a cost, and King de Copyright Odin of Rohan's life was imminent. De Copyright Odin was knocked off his horse by the Witch King of Angmar's fallen beast, and the King of Rohan was unable to mount any kind of defense against the Nazgul leader because half of his body was crushed by the now dead steed. The Witch King of Angmar commanded, "Feast upon his flesh," as his armored winged beast shifted to fulfill its rider's recent command while staring at the King of Rohan with ravenous eyes. Now standing between them, a Rohirrim member declared, "I will kill you if you touch him." The Witch King said, "Do not stand between the Nazgul and his prey," and his fallen beast moved to kill this idiot who was obstructing its meal. With a sword aimed straight at the Witching and his fallen beast, the Rohirrim declared, "I will stand against an army of you to protect him." After a few blows with the sword in hand, the idiot in question managed to avoid the fallen beast's head and cut it off. The Witch King was far from done, though, as he rose from the ground brandishing his sword and a huge spiked mace that had previously killed countless people during the battle. The adversary of the Nazgul stayed clear of the Witch King's sword and skillfully sidestepped the mace wielded by the shadowy, robed figure. Dodging the long-range weapon, however, was insufficient because the Witch King took a step faster than his opponent had expected, destroying the Rohan shield and knocking its user onto the dead horse that covered King de Copyright Odin's lower half. The Witch King approached his fallen victim, seized the Rohan fighter by the throat, and brought his sword up to make the kill. The Witch King exclaimed, "Fool, no man can kill me, die," just before he felt a hobbit named Merry's blade slash him in the back, causing the Nazgul to scream in agony because the elves had enchanted the blade when the halfling was first at Rivendell prior to the Fellowship's formation. The Rohirrim warrior proudly declared, "I am no man," before taking off her helmet to reveal that she was none other than Eowyn and using her sword to stab the Witch King in the helmeted face. Since few women in Middle-earth charged into battle and fought like their male counterparts, no one realized that killing the Nazgul leader required a female as a result. The effect was immediate. Sauron was aware that, aside from that minor flaw, the Witch King was practically invincible in combat. So far as she watched him slowly die and gave him her final glance, Eowyn fell back onto the lifeless horse whose weight had crushed her king. She could tell that he was both shocked and honored to see her on the battlefield, brandishing a sword, donning Rohirrim armor, and defeating the Witch King. Even though Eowyn was actually his niece on his sister's side, he was still proud of the woman he had come to accept as his daughter, which was an odd feeling. He tried not to cry as he smiled at her. When de Copyright Odin saw the woman crying in front of his eyes, he said, "I know your face, Eowyn," in a weary tone. He then closed his eyes for a while to allow the darkness to engulf him. Standing behind Eowyn, Naruto remarked, "He died a great king of his people." Before he picked up the beast's head to store in a sealing scroll for later use, he was standing in front of the Witch King's body and the fallen beast. When Eowyn saw Naruto kneeling and removing the Witch King's crushed metal helmet from his Nazgul's head before placing the body in a sealing scroll, she exclaimed, "You? What are you doing here?" Naruto saw the woman staring at him in shock and said, "Me? Just gathering some things. As for you, I would get treatment for the damage the Witch King inflicted, and soon, unless you wish to join de Copyright Odin on the other side." However, before she could say anything to him, the woman passed out from the intense pain her body was experiencing at the moment. Naruto smirked as he approached the downed Mumakil in front of him and withdrew an arrow smeared with the creature's blood. After putting the item away, he went to the Mumakil riders and was ready to draw some of their blood when he realized that he didn't need a sample for the spawning pool because his orcs could be used to tame his own Mumakil. When it spawned, he had more than enough for the spawning pool. Instead, he had persuaded some shadow clones to covertly apply seals to the Grand battering ram and then waited for them to finish. Now that his time here was over, Naruto decided it was time to implement the last part of his plan and left for Isengard, where he would drop off his genetic samples while wearing the Witch King's crown, for the time being. Since its garrison was now empty, he knew that his shadow clones had completed their covert task of placing the seals around the Tower of Isengard, making sure they reached all the way down to the spawning pool. He also knew that the small army he sent to Minas Morgul was doing the same there. Naruto intended to travel to Mordor after he dropped off the samples in order to stop Frodo before he destroyed the One Ring and his only way back to his world. As well as his partner, Mordor, a few days after. Samwise Gamgee remarked, "We did it, Mr. Frodo. We're in Mordor," after observing the harsh wasteland where the Dark Lord lived. Frodo Baggins added, "We have to be careful, Sam. The closer we get, the more danger we're in, and the Great Eye may learn of our presence through the ring." As they slowly descended towards Mount Doom, in the distance they found it challenging to approach it because of the sizable army in Mordor, and the danger of being discovered was increased if the Eye of Sauron happened to spot them. Since leaving the Fellowship following Boromir's death, the journey had not been simple. They had met Gollum, traveled to the boundaries of Mordor, had to navigate a swamp, were abducted by Gondor rangers, discovered that Boromir had died, and Frodo had almost given up the One Ring to the Nazgul. And that was only the beginning. Unexpectedly, though, the Mordor army soon advanced on the Black Gate, where two hobbits, a dwarf, an elf, a Rohan, and an allied army of Gondor had arrived to battle Sauron's final force. The Great Eye of Sauron now focused on the army instead of the One Ring's ability to warn the Dark Lord's spirit that it was close. The distraction of the heir to the Gondor throne leading the army outside of his domain and attempting to oppose him on an offensive front caused its call to be disregarded. At the moment, with his entire focus on this Fellowship army, the insult to the Dark Lord was far more significant to him than his own Ring of Power. As Frodo Baggins and his friend Samwise Gamgee made their way to the entrance leading deep into the center of Mount Doom while posing as orcs, the volcanic fire of the mountain raged deep within the two hobbits. They had to take off the orc armor for their basic hobbit clothing to barely survive the extreme heat the volcanic environment produced around them, and the heat increased as they approached the mountain entrance where the One Ring had to be thrown into order to destroy it. Regretfully, as they entered the mountain, Gollum made the decision to identify himself and defend what he felt was rightfully his. The former hobbit wished to hold his precious once more, but his obsession with the Ring of Power brought out another savage and monster inside of him, but for different reasons. Gollum was now battling the ring-bearer for the right to be just that after having already dragged Samwise away from Frodo. A Namikaze Naruto enters the Demon Fox mercenary punished the two who were battling for the One Ring with a few swift taijutsu moves because they didn't see him Kaminga, not that they ever could, but they didn't nonetheless. The One Ring was flung into the air, spinning like a coin flipped in midair before it was caught, and Frodo was rendered unconscious before being flung alongside Sam and Gollum into the flaming abyss below. In this instance, Naruto grabbed it with an outstretched hand and held it up so he could look at it. Naruto turned to look behind him and saw Frodo rise from the trembling ground around them. Sam attempted to pull him away, but the Baggins family member was too furious to be stopped at this point and charged at Naruto for the One Ring with enough force this time behind his blow to render Frodo unconscious. Naruto backhanded the Hobbit back onto the ground and turned to face the stunned Hobbit behind him. "Take him out of here, hurry. This place is unstable," Naruto uttered as he watched Samwise pick up Frodo and carry him away. Samwise remarked, "What about you? You have to throw that into the fire to destroy it," after noticing that Naruto was staring at the Ring of Power with an odd expression on his face. To the horror of the Hobbit, Naruto said, "That's not entirely true," and then positioned the One Ring over his ring finger. "No, don't," exclaimed Samwise as he heard Naruto's dark laugh and saw his crimson-red eyes staring at him once more. Naruto put it on his finger and said, "Too late," before his whole body vanished from Samwise's view. And into the sight of the Dark Lord Sauron. Sauron used his one fiery eye to stare at Naruto and used his power to subdue Demon Fox mercenary. You have my ring, give it to me now," he exclaimed. "Or at least making an effort." "No," Naruto said plainly, much to the Dark Lord's ire. When Sauron saw Naruto smirking, he started to create demonic chakra all around him. "You dare defy me? I am the Dark Lord Sauron, ruler of Mordor and soon all of Middle-earth," he exclaimed. Naruto's chakra swarmed around him and then shifted to enter the Ring of Power on his ring finger. "No, you're not anymore," he said. Sauron exclaimed, "What are you doing? Stop, stop," as he unexpectedly experienced pain and his spirit was expelled from the Ring of Power. His power ring Naruto boosted his power output and heard the cries of pain as the Dark Lord was killed by his power. "Why? By killing you, Middle-earth is saved. I have a newfound power, and I can go home to my mate. Everyone wins well except you, of course, since he'll be dead," he said. Sauron attempted to oppose Naruto's power but lacked the resources to do so, and the Namikaze could see cracks developing around the Great Eye's eye. "Damn you! My dreams, my ambition, and desire to rule over Middle-earth are ruined because of you," he exclaimed. "Thank you. I try to balance myself out, do a little evil, do a little good to balance out my evil actions. I can't really determine if what I'm doing now is considered good or evil. Maybe it's a little of both. Oh well, the point is everyone that matters gets what they want out of your death," Naruto said, letting out a powerful demonic roar before using even more power to kill Sauron. Sauron exclaimed in agony, "No," as his image unknown to everyone as the Great Eye cracked in agony before shattering like mirror glass. Everyone at the Black Gate saw the Great Eye disappearing before their eyes and heard the cries of agony coming from the summit of Soren's tower. Merry shouted, "Frodo!" because he thought his friend had done something that no one else could. The Sauron minions then ran away and attempted to prevent the crumbling ground from devouring them, but when Mount Doom exploded, the heroes of Middle-earth realized with horror that they had lost their friends, who had been engulfed in the lava of the enraged mountain as a spiteful way for the Dark Lord to exact revenge on those who had killed him. Naruto had called the other ring wraiths to come get him and be ready to serve their new master while this was going on. However, Naruto discovered the two hobbits on a lava-engulfed boulder, barely alive, and quickly used a genjutsu on them to make them believe that they had killed the Dark Lord rather than him using the very Ring of Power they intended to destroy. When the ring wraith arrived to collect him, Naruto gave it instructions to return him to Isengard in a stealthy manner so that no one would notice. Sometime later, Isengard, "As far as everyone in Middle-earth is concerned, you have perished in the lava at Mordor with the Ring of Power gone, and Sauron now destroyed. However, we all know that the Ring of Power is not destroyed, but Sauron is, and the Ring of Power is now mine to command. The question you must be asking yourself now is, where do you stand in this world, and what can you do now that you serve a new master? The answer is simple really, as you will join me after I resurrect your leader, and follow me to my home that is the elemental countries where I will one day rule," Naruto said, observing 8 of the 9 Nazgul in a circle formation with the Namikaze in the center and the leader on a table looking almost royal in his dead-like state. As Naruto smiled at him, one of the Nazgul remarked, "If the White Wizard finds out what you've done, an army will assemble once more to smite and destroy all that you hope to accomplish." "I do think we have a Witch King of Angmar to revive," Naruto said, removing the crushed helmet of the Nazgul leader and placing it on the former king of men's chest. By the time he does, it will be too late, and we will be gone from this world along with all the other places I've marked. As Naruto approached the Witch King's head and placed both hands on his robed face, one of the Nazgul asked, "How can you revive him?" Naruto covered his hands in demonic chakra, the ring of power glowing with the elvish tongue of Mordor written on it, and sent that power surging into the Witch King of Angmar. "Simple, I'm going to use my demonic powers combined with the One Ring to bring back the fallen Witch King before I set out to begin my plan of taking us all to my world," he said. Naruto's chakra power spread throughout the Witch King's form, even covering the crushed-in helmet he wore during the siege of Minas Tirith, causing the fallen Nazgul body to begin to spasm. The helmet started to return to its original form, as if to demonstrate to everyone observing the event the Witch King of Angmar's rebirth. After it was finished, Naruto released the hooded face of the fallen King of Men and proceeded to the helmet, which he then removed from the Nazgul's body. When Naruto was given the helmet, the Witch King slowly sat up and took it from him, treating it as though it were his own crown. It appeared to indicate that he was the head of the 9 Nazgul who had previously worked for the Dark Lord Sauron. The Witch King said, "I am alive, how?" After noticing the One Ring on Naruto's finger and realizing that the man could only be seen by manipulating it. "Through me, your new master," Naruto uttered, aware that the One Ring throbbed with energy in his ring finger. Before Naruto and the other Nazgul did the same, the Witch King said, "We live to serve," and then their new master gave them the order to stand up. As Naruto walked over to the Palantir with the 9 Nazgul following, he said, "Everything so far has happened according to plan. I have the means to return to my world, taking Isengard, my prized spawning pool below the fortress, Minas Morgul, and Weathertop with me. It won't be easy, but it's possible using my powers, combined with the One Ring, and manipulation from my Palantir to open a rift to the place I want all the things I've collected to land when we arrive in my world." He knew that this was said for a reason. After Naruto used the Palantir to show them a place of ruin that had not been visited in a long time, the Witch King asked, "And where in your world will we relocate to, my lord?" "The place my mother was originally born in, the elemental countries, was once called Whirlpool Country, which is a medium-sized continent unto itself that had whirlpools covering one section of it, and explains the reason behind the name. All the elemental countries are either named after an element, animal, or something else surrounding that particular region that people give it that name. It was destroyed during one of the wars from the past around the time my mother was born and now considered lost to the ages, completely forgotten. That is where we will rebuild everything, and that is where a new age in this world will begin," said Naruto, grinning before using the Palantir to show him Hinata sitting in her room holding a picture of himself and how she was crying. "Naruto-kun, I wish you were here. I'd run away with you to prevent this stupid sealing my father is going to have done to me in the next 2 months. I will no longer be yours, and belong to some old baka of a man for political gain," Hinata said through the Palantir. Naruto's heart ached with sadness, and then he became furious at what was about to happen. As he saw the Nazgul staring at Hinata, Naruto said in a voice full of righteousness, "Hang on, my love, I'm coming. No soul in Middle-earth could stop me from getting what I need to be with you soon. There won't be one in the elemental countries who is going to stand in my way of saving you from such cruelty either." He asked them if they felt anything like sadness for their new master. The Witch King declared, "We are ready to follow you, my lord," after observing Naruto nod and realizing that the ring of power he was holding was slightly altering them to ensure that they carried out his intentions. Naruto activated the seals on the Palantir, which were now glowing red throughout, and proceeded outward through the interior workings of Isengard and the other locations he had marked, while aware that he only had one chance at this. "Good. Now let's see if all I have done here in Middle-earth has been worth this moment in time," he said. Naruto could feel the dimensional rift encircling the entire tower as the form of Whirlpool Country emerged in the Palantir in all its vast, yet destroyed glory, from the time it was taken from the world following its most recent war when they landed in Naruto's world's Whirlpool Country. The seals he had placed in different places across Middle-earth were intended to be absorbed into the dimensional rift and then repositioned. But rather than opening the portal to his world, Naruto's true challenge was to keep it open long enough to carry everything he desired to the elemental countries without running out of chakras. Naruto, however, was not going to back down now, because he gave this his all and pushed himself to the limit in order to achieve his objective. Everything around him appeared to be turning into drawn-out smears, and the Namikaze could only scream in agony as he felt his body and everything else being drawn into the dimensional rift. When Naruto vowed that nothing, not even death, would stop the mercenary from defending Hinata and crushing those who wished to destroy that amazing woman, the last thing that had crossed his mind before he passed out from the stress was the image of his mate.